Hello everyone, I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from? And what time are you watching now? Get comfortable and relax. The wind howled like a wounded animal rattling the windows of my secluded cabin. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders, trying to shake off the eerie feeling that had been creeping up on me all evening. It was supposed to be a peaceful getaway, a chance to clear my head and finish my novel. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I'd chosen this cabin for its isolation, nestled deep in the woods miles from the nearest neighbor. Now, that isolation felt less like a blessing and more like a curse. The crackling fire in the hearth did little to dispel the chill that had settled in my bones. It started with little things: a branch scraping against the roof, a creak in the floorboards, normal sounds for an old cabin in the woods, I told myself. But as the night wore on, the sounds changed, became more deliberate. I was curled up on the couch, laptop balanced on my knees, trying to lose myself in my writing, when I heard a distinct crunch of leaves outside, like footsteps circling the cabin. My fingers froze over the keyboard, my breath catching in my throat. "It's just an animal," I whispered to myself, but the word sounded hollow, even to my own ears. Animals don't circle a cabin like that, methodical and purposeful. I set my laptop aside and crept to the window, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it could be heard outside. Pulling back the curtain just a fraction, I peered out into the darkness. At first I saw nothing but the inky blackness of the forest. Then a movement caught my eye, a shadow darker than the night around it moved between the trees. I blinked, sure I was imagining things, but when I looked again, there was another and another. My blood ran cold as I realized what I was seeing. There were people out there, multiple shadowy figures standing motionless among the trees, all facing my cabin, watching, waiting. I let the curtain fall back into place, my mind racing. Who were they? What did they want? I fumbled for my phone, cursing under my breath when I remembered the lack of cell service out here. The landline. There was a landline in the kitchen. I made my way there on shaky legs, keeping low and away from the windows. The ancient rotary phone sat on the counter, a relic from a bygone era. I picked up the receiver, praying for a dial tone silence. The line was dead. A sob of frustration and fear escaped me. I was trapped alone with no way to call for help. The cabin suddenly felt like a cage, and I was the prey waiting to be devoured. A loud thump from outside made me jump. They were getting closer. I could hear those now low murmurs that I couldn't quite make out. My eyes darted around the kitchen, looking for anything I could use to defend myself. My gaze landed on the block of knives on the counter. I grabbed the largest one, its weight unfamiliar and terrifying in my hand. I'd never hurt anyone before, never even been in a real fight, but now faced with unknown intruders, I knew I'd do whatever it took to survive. Another thump, this time from the front of the cabin. They were at the door. I pressed myself against the wall next to the kitchen entrance, knife clutched to my chest, trying to control my ragged breathing. The door handle jiggled once, twice, then silence for a moment. I dared to hope they'd given up. That hope was shattered by the sound of breaking glass. They were coming in through a window. Panic threatened to overwhelm me. I couldn't stay here cornered in the kitchen. I had to move to find a way out the back door. If I could make it to the back door, maybe I could slip into the woods, lose them in the darkness. I inched my way along the wall toward the rear of the cabin. Each step felt like an eternity, the floorboards creaking tracerously beneath my feet. I could hear them inside now, their whispers echoing through the cabin. Just as I reached the back door, a floorboard groaned loudly under my weight. The whisper stopped abruptly. They'd heard me. There was no more time for stealth. I yanked open the door and plunged into the night, the cold air hitting me like a physical blow. I ran blindly, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step behind me. I could hear shouts and the crashing of bodies through the underbrush. They were pursuing me. The forest that had seemed so peaceful during the day was now a nightmare landscape of shadows and hidden dangers. I ran until my lungs burned, until each breath felt like fire in my chest, but still I could hear them behind me getting closer. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately regretted it. In the darkness, I could make out multiple figures, their outlines barely distinguishable from the trees around them. My foot caught on a root, and I went down hard, the taste of dirt and leaves filling my mouth. The knife flew from my hand, disappearing into the underbrush. I scrambled to my feet, but it was too late. They were upon me. Rough hands grabbed me, spinning me around. I lashed out blindly, my fists connecting with something solid, a grunt of pain, then more hands restraining me, holding me still enough. A voice growled, deep and authoritative, "We don't want to hurt you." I stopped, struggling more out of surprise than compliance. "What do you want?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause, then the sound of a match being struck. A small flame illuminated the face of the man holding it, casting eerie shadows across his features. He looked normal, not at all like the monster I'd been imagining. "We need your help," he said, his eyes locked on mine. "Something coming, something terrible. And you're the only one who can stop it." I stared at him, sure I must have misheard. "What? I don't understand. Who are you people?" The man sighed, extinguishing the match in the sudden darkness. His voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "We are the guardians of this forest. We've watched it for generations, protecting it from threats, both natural and unnatural." Another voice, a woman's this time, picked up the tale. "There's a darkness coming. A corruption that threatens not just this forest, but the entire world. We've seen it in our visions, creeping closer with each passing day. And you think I can stop it?" I asked, incredulity coloring my voice. "I'm just a writer. I came here to finish my novel, not to save the world." A dry chuckle from somewhere to my left. "Fate has a funny way of putting them. Right people in the right place at the right time. Your novel, the one you've been struggling to finish, it's more important than you know." My mind was reeling. This couldn't be happening. It had to be some kind of elaborate prank or a vivid hallucination brought on by too much solitude and too little sleep. "I don't believe you," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I felt a small spark of something, recognition, acceptance. I couldn't quite place it. The first man spoke again, his voice gentle now. "We know it's a lot to take, and we're sorry for scaring you, but we had to be sure you were the one before we approached. Will you hear us out? Let us explain everything." I stood there surrounded by strangers in a dark forest, every instinct screaming at me to run, but beneath the fear and confusion, there was a growing sense of curiosity, of purpose. What if they were telling the truth? What if I really could make a difference? After what felt like an eternity, I nodded. "Okay," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'll listen, but this better not be some crazy cult thing." A ripple of relieved laughter went through the group. The tea that had been thick in the air began to dissipate as we made our way back to the cabin, guided by flashlights that seemed to appear out of nowhere. I couldn't shake the feeling that my life had just changed irrevocably. The novel I'd come here to write suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the story I was about to become a part of. As we stepped into the warm light of the cabin, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever revelations awaited me. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of an adventure that would challenge everything I thought I knew about the world, about reality itself. The shadows that had terrified me moments ago now held the promise of hidden truths and ancient mysteries. As I settled in to hear their tale, I couldn't help but think that sometimes the things that scare us the most are the very things that have the power to transform us. And in that moment, surrounded by these strange guardians of the forest, I was ready to be transformed. The neon sign of the Alight Diner flickered weakly in the distance, a beacon of hope on this godforsaken stretch of highway I'd been driving for hours, my eyes stinging from the endless ribbon of asphalt stretching before me. As I pulled into the nearly empty parking lot, I noticed a lone figure standing by the road thumb. Outstretched against my better judgment, I decided to stop. Little did I know that simple act of kindness would plunge me into a nightmare. I couldn't have imagined. I eased my car to a stop next to the hitchhiker. He was a tall, lanky guy with a scraggly beard and clothes that had seen better days. As I rolled down my window, the smell of stale sweat and cigarettes wafted in. "Where you headed?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. His eyes darted around nervously before settling on me. "Just down the road a ways." Name's Mike. Something in his manner set off alarm bells in my head, but I pushed the feeling aside. It was late, I was tired, and leaving someone stranded out here in the middle of nowhere didn't sit right with me. "Hop in," I said, unlocking the passenger door. "I'm Dave." Mike slid into the seat, his backpack clutched tightly to his chest. As we pulled back onto the highway, I noticed his hands were shaking slightly. "You okay, man?" I asked, glancing at him sidelong. He nodded jerkily. Yeah, just cold, you know." I didn't buy it for a second, but I let it slide. We drove in silence for a few miles, the tension in the car growing thicker with each passing minute. I was starting to regret my decision to pick him up. "So what brings you out here in the middle of the night?" I asked, trying to break the uncomfortable silence. Mike's whole body tense. Just trying to get away, you know, away from what he didn't answer, just stared straight ahead, his fingers drumming an erratic rhythm on his backpack. The miles ticked by and Mike's agitation seemed to grow. He kept looking in the rearview mirror, as if expecting to see someone following us. I was about to suggest dropping him off at the next town when he suddenly spoke up. "You've got to help me, man," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. There after me, I felt a chill run down my spine. "Who's after you?" Mike's eyes were wide with fear. "The people I stole from. I didn't mean to. I swear I was just desperate, you know. But they found out, and now they want me dead." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What did you steal?" He unzipped his backpack slightly, just enough for me to catch a glimpse of stacks of bills and what looked like jewelry. My heart rate spiked. "Jesus Christ," I muttered. "You brought stolen goods into my car." I'm sorry," Mike babbled. "I didn't know. What else did you got to help me get away from them?" As if on cue, headlights appeared in the rear view mirror, growing rapidly larger. "Oh God," Mike moaned. "It's them. They found me." I pressed down on the accelerator, my mind racing. What had I gotten myself into? The headlights behind us grew closer, and I could now make out the outline of a large SUV. "Who are these people, Mike?" I demanded, swerving around a curve in the road. "Bad people," he whimpered. "Really bad people, the kind that make problems disappear, if you know what I mean." The SUV was right on our tail now, its high beams flooding the car with harsh light. I could see two figures in the front seat, their faces obscured by the glare. Suddenly, the SUV rammed us from behind. The impact sent us fishtailing, and I fought to keep control of the car. Mike was screaming now, clutching his backpack like a lifeline. "What the hell do they want?" I yelled, straightening out the car. "Everything," Mike said, his voice hollow. "The money, the jewels, and me dead." The SUV rammed us again, harder this time. I could feel the rear of my car crumpling under the impact. We weren't going to be able to outrun them. Up ahead, I saw a turnoff leading into a wooded area. Without thinking, I yanked the wheel hard to the right, sending us canting down the dirt road. Branches whipped at the windshield as we plunged deeper into the forest. The SUV followed, its massive frame barely fitting between the trees. I pushed my old sedan to its limits, and praying it wouldn't give out on us. "Now, we need to ditch the car," I said, my mind working overtime. "It's too easy to follow." Mike nodded, his face pale in the dim light filtering through the trees. I spotted a small clearing up ahead and steered towards it, killing the headlights. As we approached, we burst into the clearing, and I slammed on the brakes, sending us into a spin. As soon as we stopped, I was out of the car, dragging Mike with me. "Run," I hissed, pulling him towards the dense undergrowth. At the edge of the clearing, we plunged into the darkness, branches tearing at our clothes, roots threatening to trip us. With every step behind us, I could hear the SUV crashing through the trees. getting closer, we ran until our lungs burned, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter. Finally, when I thought I couldn't take another step, we stumbled upon an old abandoned barn, and here I gasped, pulling open the weathered door. The interior was pitch black and smelled of musty hay and rusted metal. We felt our way to a back corner and huddled there, trying to quiet our ragged breathing. Minutes ticked by like hours, every creak of the old barn, every rustle of leaves outside sent a jolt of fear through me. What had I gotten myself into? "I'm sorry," Mike whispered beside me. "I never meant for any of this to happen." I turned to him, anger bubbling up despite my fear. "What exactly did happen, Mike? I think I deserve the whole truth now." He was quiet for a long moment, then sighed. "I used to work for them, the people chasing us. They're part of a big organized crime ring. I was just a low-level guy, running errands, making deliveries. But I saw things, terrible things." A chill ran down my spine. "What kind of things?" "Murder," he said, his voice barely audible. "Torture. They're monsters, all of them." I couldn't take it anymore, so I decided to leave, but I knew they'd never let me go, not with what I knew. So I took some insurance money, jewelry, and documents, proof of what they've done. I felt sick to my stomach. "And now they're after both of us." Mike nodded miserably. "I'm so sorry. I never meant to drag anyone else into this." Before I could respond, a beam of light cut through the darkness of the barn. We froze, hardly daring to breathe. "We know you're in here," a gruff voice called out. "Come out now, and maybe we'll let your friend live." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. Mike was trembling beside me, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "What do we do?" I whispered. Mike's hand found mine in the darkness, pressing something into it. "The stolen documents. Take these," he whispered. "Get them to the police. It's the only way to stop them." Before I could stop him, he stood up. "I'm here," he called out, his voice surprisingly steady. "Let the other guy go. He doesn't know anything." "No," I hissed, trying to pull him back down. But it was too late. The beam of light found him, and I heard the sound of multiple footsteps approaching. "Run," Mike said, not looking back at me. "Get those documents to the police. It's the only way any of this means anything." I wanted to argue, to pull him back into hiding, but I knew he was right. This was bigger than both of us now. As the footsteps grew closer, I slipped away, moving as quietly as I could. Towards the back of the barn, I found a rotted board and pry it loose, squeezing through the gap. The cool night air hit me like a slap to the face. Behind me, I could hear voices raised in anger, then a single gunshot that echoed through the trees. I ran until my legs gave out, until the barn and all its horrors were far behind me. As the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, I found myself on the outskirts of a small town. With shaking hands, I pulled out the documents. Mike had given me names, dates, photographs, evidence of crimes that made my blood run cold. I knew what I had to do for Mike, for myself, and for all the other victims of these monsters. As I walked towards the local police station, the weight of the documents heavy in my hands, I couldn't help but think about how a simple act of kindness had changed my life forever. I had set out on a routine drive and ended up in the middle of a nightmare. But sometimes I realized it's in our darkest moments that we find our true strength. And as I pushed open the door to the police station, I knew that this was just the beginning of a much bigger story. The first drop of rain hit my face as I zipped up the last hint. I looked up at the darkening sky, a knot forming in my stomach. This wasn't the peaceful family camping trip I had promised Sarah and the kids, but little did I know the incoming storm would be the least of our worries. "Dad, and is it going to rain?" my son Tommy asked, his eyes wide with a mix of excitement and apprehension. I forced a smile. "Just a little drizzle, nobody, nothing to worry about." Sarah shot me a skeptical look as she coiled our daughter Emma into the larger of our two tents. "Maybe we should pack up and head home, John. This doesn't look like a little drizzle to me." I shook my head perhaps a bit too stubbornly. We'll be fine. I checked the forecast before we left. It's just a passing shower. Oh, how I wish I had listened to her. The rain started in earnest. As we huddled in our tents, the pitter-patter on the canvas quickly turning into a torrential downpour. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and flashes of lightning illuminated the forest around us. The kids were scared, but we made a game of it, telling stories and making shadow puppets with our flashlights. As the night wore on, the storm finally began to subside. The constant drumming of rain on our tents softened to a gentle drizzle, and the thunder became a distant grumble. Exhausted from the excitement and our long day of hiking, we all drifted off to sleep. I woke with a start, unsure of what had roused me. The forest was eerily quiet, the storm having passed during the night. A glance at my watch told me it was just past 3 a.m. Something felt off. Carefully, so as not to wake Sarah, I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The air was thick with mist, giving the campsite an otherworldly feel. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Our campsite had been ransacked. The picnic table where we had left our cooler and supplies was overturned. Contents of our backpacks were strewn across the muddy ground. At first, I thought perhaps the storm had been more severe than we realized, but as I looked closer, I saw that this was no act of nature. Footprints too large to be any of ours crisscrossed the campsite, and there, carved into the bark of a nearby tree, was a crude message that sent a shiver down my spine. Get out, you don't belong here. My heart racing, I rushed back to the tent. Sarah, I whispered urgently, shaking her awake. Sarah, wake up, we need to go. She blinked at me, groggy. What, John, what's wrong? I explained what I had seen in hushed tones, not wanting to wake the kids just yet. Sarah's face paled as she listened, her eyes widening in fear. We need to call the police, and she said, reaching for her phone. I nodded, but as she tried to dial, her face fell. No signal. She muttered, of course, we were miles from the nearest town, surrounded by dense forest. We were on our own. Let's wake the kids, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We'll pack up and hike back to the car. It's only a couple of miles. Sarah nodded, but I could see the fear in her eyes. As we roused Tommy and Emma, trying to keep our explanations vague so as not to scare them too much, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. We packed as quickly and quietly as we could, our eyes constantly darting to the tree line, searching for any sign of movement. The kids, sensing our unease, remained uncharacteristically quiet. Just as we were about to leave, Emma tugged on my sleeve. Dad, she whispered, pointing towards the trees. I saw someone. I followed her gaze, my heart pounding. For a moment, I saw nothing, then a shadow moved between the trees. Another followed it, and another. Sarah, I said, my voice low and urgent, get the kids in the tent now. She didn't argue, quickly ushering Tommy and Emma back into the larger tent. I stood my ground, trying to look braver than I felt. Who's there? I called out, my voice echoing in the still forest. We're leaving. Okay, just let us go in peace. For a long moment there was silence, then a voice, rough and menacing, came from the darkness. This is our land. You're not welcome here. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. We're sorry, we didn't know. We're packing up now. We'll be gone within the hour. A harsh laugh echoed through the trees. You've got 10 minutes, then we're coming for you. My blood ran cold. I rushed back to the tent, my hand shaking as I zipped it open. Sarah looked up at me, her face pale in the dim light of our lantern. We need to go now, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Leave everything except what we can carry. Sarah nodded, her eyes wide with fear. We worked quickly, stuffing a few essentials into our day packs. The kids, bless them, seemed to understand the gravity of the situation and didn't complain or ask questions. As we emerged from the tent, the forest around us had come alive with whispers and the cracking of twigs. They were getting closer. Stay close, I murmured, taking Emma's hand while Sarah held onto Tommy. We're going to head for the car. No matter what happens, don't stop running. We set off into the forest, our path illuminated only by the weak beam of my flashlight. The going was tough. The recent rain had turned the ground into a treacherous mud slick, and roots seemed to reach up to trip us at every step behind us. I could hear our pursuers. They weren't even trying to be quiet now. Shouts and whoops echoed through the trees, spurring us on faster. We had been running for what felt like hours, though it could only have been minutes, when disaster struck. Tommy's foot caught on a root, sending him sprawling to the ground. With a cry of pain, my ankle, he whimpered as Sarah helped him up. I can't walk. The voices were getting closer. We couldn't stop, couldn't afford to slow down. Without a word, I handed Emma to Sarah and scooped Tommy up onto my back. Hold on tight, buddy, I grunted, adjusting his weight. We're almost there. We pressed on the extra weight, making each step a struggle. The shouts behind us were getting louder, more frenzied. They were gaining on us. Just when I thought my legs would give out, I saw it, the glint of metal through the trees. Our car there, I gasped. We're almost there. We burst out of the tree line into the small clearing where we had parked. I fumbled for the keys, my hands slick with sweat and rain. Hurry, John, Sarah cried, her eyes fixed on the forest behind us. I could see them now, shadowy figures emerging from the trees. With a click that seemed to echo through the entire forest, the car unlocked. We piled in, and I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. Just as the first of our pursuers reached the car, a face twisted with rage appeared at my window. I threw the car into reverse, tires spinning in the mud. Before finally finding purchase, we shot backwards, narrowly missing a tree before I swung the wheel hard, pointing us towards the road. As we sped away, I could see them in the rearview mirror, a group of men, their faces hidden by the shadows, watching us go. We didn't stop driving until we reached the nearest town, our hearts still pounding, adrenaline coursing through our veins. As we pulled into the parking lot of the local police station, Sarah turned to me, her face pale in the early morning light. What was that, John? Who were those people? I shook my head, still trying to process everything that had happened. I don't know, but we're safe now. That's what matters. As we sat there waiting for the station to open, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had narrowly escaped something truly sinister. The forest, which had always been a place of peace and adventure for me, now seemed dark and foreboding. I looked at my family, Sarah, her arm protectively around Emma, Tommy wincing as he gingerly tested his ankle, and felt a wave of guilt wash over me. My stubbornness, my refusal to listen to Sarah's concerns, had put them all in danger. I'm sorry, I said, my voice cracking. I should have listened to you, Sarah. This is all my fault. She reached out and took my hand, squeezing it gently. We're okay, John. We made it out. That's what's important. As the sun began to rise, casting a warm glow over the town, I made a silent vow. Never again would I take unnecessary risks with my family's safety, the wilderness beautiful as it was held. Dangers I had never fully appreciated until now. We had set out for a simple family camping trip and ended up running for our lives through a dark forest, but we had survived together. And in that moment, as we waited for the police station to open, I realized that was all that truly mattered. The camping equipment could be replaced, the car would need a good wash, but my family safe and sound beside me was irreplaceable. As we prepared to tell our story to the authorities, I knew that this harrowing night would stay with us forever, a reminder of the power of nature, the darkness that can lurk in seemingly peaceful places, and the strength we can find when we stand together in the face of danger. The rhythmic beeping of heart monitors and the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on Lenham were the soundtrack to my nights. As a janitor at St. Andrew's Hospital, I was used to the eerie calm that settled over the place in the small hours. But on that fateful night, the calm was shattered by a discovery that would turn my world upside down and plunge me into a dangerous game of cat and mouse. I remember it clearly. It was a Tuesday night, or rather Wednesday morning, 3:17 a.m. to be exact. I was on the third floor, methodically working my way through my nightly routine: mop, wipe, empty trash, repeat. The monotony was almost meditative. That's when I saw her nurse, Samantha, a big woman with a reputation for being as tough as nails, was acting odd. She was outside the supply closet, glancing nervously over her shoulder. Every few seconds her hands fumbled with the lock, and I could see beads of sweat on her face, forehead. Even from where I stood, curiosity got the better of me. I pretended to be engrossed in cleaning a stubborn scuff mark on the floor all the while, keeping her in my peripheral vision. What I saw next made my blood run cold. Samantha slipped into the supply closet, emerging moments later with her large purse noticeably fuller. She quickly walked away, her shoes making soft thuds on the floor. I waited until she was out of sight before approaching the closet. The door hadn't fully closed behind her. I pushed it open, gently wincing at the slight creak inside. I found evidence of her theft: empty spaces where vials of medication should have been. My mind raced. Samantha was stealing drugs, but why to sell? To use. The implications were staggering. Patients could be at risk, lives could be in danger. I knew I had to do something, but what? Samantha was well liked by the staff and had been at St. Andrews for years. Would anyone believe me, a night janitor over her? I decided to gather more evidence. Over the next few nights, I watched Samantha closely. She was clever, I had to give her that. She varied her routine, sometimes taking from the supply closet, other times pocketing medications directly from the crash cards. By the end of the week, I had a notebook full of observations, times dates, and approximate quantities of drugs taken. But I still hesitated to come forward. What if I was wrong? What if there was a reasonable explanation for all this? My hesitation nearly cost me everything. It was Sunday night when things came to a head. I was in the break room pouring myself a much-needed cup of coffee when Samantha walked in the room. Suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. Samantha, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, I saw what you were doing in the supply closet. She froze, her eyes narrowing. And what are you talking about? I took a deep breath. I know you've been taking medication. I've seen you do it multiple times this week. Her face turned red, a vein pulsing in her forehead. You don't know what you're talking about, she hissed. Mind your own business. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. Samantha was unpredictable, and I knew I had to tread carefully. I'm not going to let this go, I said firmly. I have to report it. Before I could react, Samantha lunged forward, grabbing me by the collar of my uniform. Her face was inches from mine, her breath hot on my cheek. You're not going to say anything, she snarled. If you do, I'll make sure you regret it. Fear seized me like a vice. Samantha was much stronger than I had anticipated. I struggled against her grip, trying to break free. Let me go, I gasped, my heart racing. She hesitated for a moment, studying me with narrowed eyes. Then, without warning, she shoved me backward. I crashed into a nearby table, pain shooting through my back as I hit the ground. The wind knocked out of me. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Samantha was advancing toward me. Fury etched on her face. I knew I had to get out of there, find help before things escalated further. I bolted from the break room, ignoring the pain in my side. My mind raced as I searched for a way to expose Samantha's illegal activities without endangering myself. The hospital was eerily quiet, the night shift staff occupied with their duties. As I rounded a corner, I nearly collided with Dr. Patel, one of the senior physicians on duty. He raised an eyebrow at my disheveled appearance. Are you all right? He asked, concern evident in his voice. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I could trust him, but time was running out. I need to talk to you, I said urgently, glancing over my shoulder. It's about Nurse Samantha. Dr. Patel led me to a quiet corner of the hallway, away from prying eyes. "What's going on?" he asked, his brow furrowed. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "Samantha's been stealing drugs from the hospital," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "I've seen her taking medications from the supply closet and crash carts. She threatened me." When I confronted her, "I don't know what to do." Dr. Patel's eyes widened in surprise. "Are you sure?" he asked, his tone serious. I nodded, feeling a sense of relief that someone was finally listening to me. "I've been documenting it all week, times, dates, quantities. I have it all written down." He nodded, thoughtfully weighing his options. "We need to report this," he said finally. "But we have to be careful. Samantha could be dangerous together." We went to the hospital administrator's office. Dr. Patel explained the situation in hushed tones. While I provided my notebook of observations, the administrator listened intently, her expression grave. "We'll launch an investigation immediately," she said, her voice firm. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention." As the hours passed, the hospital buzzed with activity. I stayed close to Dr. Patel, afraid to be alone after what had happened with Samantha. Nurses and staff whispered among themselves, casting weary glances in my direction. By morning, Samantha was escorted from the hospital by security. She fought and screamed, her rage echoing down the hallway. I watched from a safe distance, feeling a mixture of fear and relief. The danger was over, but the memory of her threats lingered in my mind. In the days that followed, the hospital tightened security measures, implementing stricter protocols for handling medications. I was commended for my bravery, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Samantha had made it clear that she would stop at nothing to protect her secret. I continued to work the night shift, but things were different now. Every sound made me jump, every shadow seemed to hold a potential threat. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see Samantha's angry face glaring at me from around a corner. Weeks passed, and slowly the fear began to fade. The hospital settled back into its routine, and I found myself able to breathe a little easier. But the experience had changed me. I no longer saw the hospital as just a place of work. It had become a battlefield where I had faced down a dangerous adversary and emerged victorious. One night, as I was finishing up my shift, Dr. Patel approached me. "I wanted to thank you again," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "What you did took real courage. You probably saved lives." I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips. "I was just doing what was right," I replied. As I left the hospital that morning, the sun just beginning to peek over the horizon, I felt a sense of pride wash over me. I had started this job as just a night janitor, invisible to most of the staff and patients, but now I had made a real difference. I had protected the very people I had been hired to clean up after. The hospital loomed behind me, its windows reflecting the orange glow of the rising sun. It was no longer just a building to me. It was a reminder that even the most ordinary person can become a hero when faced with injustice. As I drove home, exhausted but satisfied, I realized that my simple job had become something much more. I wasn't just keeping the hospital clean anymore, I was keeping it safe, and that I decided was a responsibility I was proud to bear. The night Samantha was caught might have been the most terrifying of my life, but it was also the night that showed me what I was capable of in the face of danger. I had stood my ground, and in doing so I had not only changed the hospital for the better, but had also changed myself. As I crawled into bed that morning, the events of the past week replaying in my mind, I knew that I would never look at my job the same way again. The mop and bucket were still my tools, but now they represented something more, a commitment to protecting the vulnerable, to standing up for what's right no matter the cost. And as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't help but wonder what other secrets the night shift might reveal. But whatever came my way, I knew I was ready to face it head on. The steam rising from the paper bag in my passenger seat carried the aroma of garlic and tomato sauce, a scent that usually made my mouth water, But tonight, as I navigated the dark, unfamiliar streets of this upscale neighborhood, my stomach was knotted with an inexplicable unease. I had no idea that this routine delivery would lead me into a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. My name's Jake, and I've been delivering for Mario's Pizza for about 6 months now. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills. While I finish my degree, most nights are pretty uneventful, just me, my beat-up Honda, and the endless sprawl of suburban houses. But this night was different. From the moment I pulled up to the address, the house stood apart from its neighbors, set back from the street, and shrouded in shadows. The porch light was off, which was unusual for a delivery. As I approached the front door, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. Something felt off. I rang the doorbell, the muffled chime echoing inside. No answer. I knocked louder this time. Hello, pizza delivery. Just as I was about to give up and head back to my car, the door creaked open. A man stood there, his face half hidden in shadow. He was tall and thin, with a scruffy beard and eyes that seemed to bore right through me. Delivery from Mario's, I said, forcing a smile. That'll be 18 or 50. He nodded and stepped aside, gesturing for me to come in. This was against company policy, but something in his manner made me hesitate to refuse. As soon as I crossed the threshold, he shut the door behind me with a loud thud. The house was dimly lit and sparsely furnished. He led me into what I assumed was the living room, though it was hard to tell in the low light. Wait here, he said, his voice low and rough. He disappeared into another room, leaving me standing there, still clutching the pizza bag. Minutes passed, and he didn't return. The silence in the house was oppressive, broken only by the ticking of a clock somewhere nearby. I started to get nervous. This wasn't normal. I set the pizza down on a dusty table and called out, "Sir, your food's getting cold." No response. I took a tentative step towards the doorway. He had disappeared through. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around to see the man standing there, but he wasn't alone. In his hand was a gun pointed directly at me. My heart leapt into my throat. "Whoa, man," I said, raising my hands. "Take it easy. I don't want any trouble. Sit down," he said, his voice cold and menacing. I slowly lowered myself onto the couch, my mind racing. When had I walked into? He kept the gun trained on me, his eyes boring into mine. "Do you know why you're here?" he asked. I shook my head, trying to keep my voice steady. "No, I don't. I'm just delivering a pizza." He sneered. "Your boss, he ruined my life, and now you're going to help me get back at him." "My boss, Frank, the owner of Mario's. What could he have possibly done to this guy?" The man started pacing, still holding the gun. He ranted about how Frank had cheated him, driven him to bankruptcy, destroyed his family. His words were filled with anger and bitterness. I tried to stay calm, but fear was clawing at me from the inside. I needed to find a way out, but he was unpredictable and armed. I glanced around the room, looking for anything that might help me. He noticed. "Don't even think about trying anything," he warned, waving the gun for emphasis. "You're not leaving here until I've had my revenge." I took a deep breath, trying to think clearly. "Look, I just delivered the food. I don't know anything about what happened between you and my boss, but maybe we can figure something out." He shook his head, his grip on the gun tightening. "No, you're just a pawn, but your boss, he'll pay for what he did." He continued pacing, muttering to himself. I knew I had to act fast. I noticed a heavy lamp on the side table within reach. It was my only chance. I waited for him to turn his back, then lunged for the lamp and swung it at him with all my strength. The lamp connected with his head, and he staggered, dropping the gun. I didn't wait to see if he was down for good. I grabbed the gun and ran for the door, my heart racing. I fumbled with the lock, my hand shaking so badly it took 2 tries to get it open. I sprinted to my car, jumped in, and locked the doors. My hands were trembling so much I could barely get the key into the ignition. Finally, the engine roared to life in the rearview mirror. I saw the man stumble out onto the porch, clutching his head. I Florida gravel flying as I tore out of the driveway. I drove back to town as fast as I could, my mind a whirlwind of fear and adrenaline. When I reached Mario's, I burst through the door, startling Frank, who was closing up for the night. "Jake, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost," Frank said, his brow furrowed with concern. I collapsed into a chair, my legs finally giving out between gasps. I told Frank everything that had happened. His face grew pale as I recounted the man's accusations. "Oh God," Frank muttered, sinking into the chair opposite me. "I never thought he'd go this far." "You know him?" I asked, incredulous. Frank nodded, his eyes distant. "His name's Robert. We used to be business partners years ago. Things didn't end well between us, but I never imagined he'd do something like this." I felt a mix of relief and anger. Relief that I wasn't crazy, that this wasn't some random act of violence, but anger that Frank's past had put me in danger. "We need to call the police," I said, reaching for my phone. Frank nodded, looking older and more tired than I'd ever seen him. "You're right. I should have done this a long time ago." The next few hours were a blur of police statements and questions. They took the gun as evidence and promised to track down Robert. As the adrenaline wore off, I started to feel the full weight of what had happened. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and every little noise made me jump. Frank insisted on driving me home, apologizing the whole way. "I'm so sorry, Jake. I never meant for anyone else to get caught up in this mess." I nodded, too exhausted to say much. When we got to my apartment, Frank turned to me, his face serious. "Take some time off, Jake. Paid leave. And if you decide you don't want to come back, I'll understand." I thought about it for a moment. The idea of going back out on deliveries terrified me, but at the same time, I felt a strange sense of pride. I had faced down a dangerous situation and come out alive. I had outsmarted a man with a gun. "I'll think about it," I said finally that night as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I couldn't stop replaying them events in my mind, the man's face, the cold metal of the gun, the sound of the lamp connecting with his skull. It all felt surreal, like a movie I had watched rather than something I had lived through. But as the days passed, something changed in me. The fear began to fade, replaced by a newfound confidence. I had stared death in the face and survived. What else could life throw at me that I couldn't handle? A week later, I walked back into Mario's. Frank looked up surprised to see me. "Jake, are you sure about this?" I nodded, picking up the next delivery order. "Yeah, I'm sure, but Frank, next time you have a crazy ex-business partner out for revenge, maybe give us delivery guys a heads up." Frank laughed, relief evident on his face. "Deal." As I walked out to my car, pizza bag in hand, I felt different. The night was still dark, the streets still unfamiliar. But now, instead of fear, I felt a sense of readiness. Whatever came my way, I knew I could handle it. The steam from the pizza bag still carried the scent of garlic and tomato sauce. But now, instead of making my stomach knot with unease, it smelled like opportunity, like life. With all its danger and excitement, I started the car and pulled out onto the street, ready for whatever the night might bring. After all, I was no longer just a pizza delivery guy. I was a survivor. The crunch of leaves beneath my boots echoed through the silent forest. I paused, my breath forming small clouds in the crisp autumn air. Something wasn't right. The woods were too quiet, as if holding their breath in anticipation. That's when I saw it, a flash of movement between the trees. I wasn't alone out here, and my peaceful hiking trip was about to turn into a fight for survival. My name's Alex, and I've always loved the outdoors. Growing up in a small town near the Adara, I spent most of my childhood exploring the forests and mountains. Now, at 28, I still try to get away whenever I can, escaping the hustle of city life for the serenity of nature. This particular trip was supposed to be a solo weekend adventure, just me, my backpack, and miles of untouched wilderness. I'd been hiking for hours, enjoying the solitude and the vibrant fall colors, But as the day wore on, that feeling of peace slowly gave way to an unsettling sense of unease. It started with little things: a snapped twig here, a rustling of leaves. Their sounds that wouldn't normally bother me suddenly had me on edge. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just wildlife, but deep down I knew better. As I rounded a bend in the trail, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, in a small clearing, was a makeshift camp. But this was no ordinary campsite. Tarps were strung up haphazardly between trees, creating a mosaic structure. Piles of empty cans and bottles littered the ground, and they're scratched into the bark of a large oak tree were the words "Keep Out" in jagged, angry letters. My heart pounding, I knew I needed to get out of there fast. I turned to retrace my steps, but before I could move, I heard voices, rough male voices, getting closer. By the second, panic surged through me. I ducked behind a large boulder, trying to make myself as small as possible. Through a gap in the rocks, I could see 3 men enter the clearing. They were a rough-looking bunch with wild beards and tattered clothes. Each carried a rifle slung over their shoulder. I'm telling you, I heard one of them growled, his eyes scanning the area. Probably another one of them hikers, thinking they can just wander wherever they please. Well, if you did hear someone, they picked the wrong day for a nature walk. Another chuckled, the sound sending chills down my spine. I held my breath, afraid even the slightest movement would give me away. The men continued to search the area, getting closer to my hiding spot. With each passing second, I knew I couldn't stay there forever. Sooner or later they'd find me. Making a split-second decision, I waited until their backs were turned, then darted from behind the boulder. I ran as fast as I could, branches whipping at my face. As I tore through the underbrush behind me, I heard shouts of alarm, followed by the ominous sound of rifles being cocked. There he is, get him! Fear gave me wings. I ran like I'd never run before, leaping over fallen logs and ducking under low-hanging branches. The forest that had seemed so peaceful just hours ago was now a treacherous obstacle course. A gunshot rang out, the bullet splintering the trunk of a tree inches from my head. Bark exploded outward, stinging my cheek. I didn't slow down, didn't look back. I just ran. I could hear them behind me crashing through the forest. They knew these woods better than I did, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they caught up. I needed a plan up ahead. I spotted a small ravine without hesitation. I slid down the steep embankment, loose rocks and soil tumbling down with me. At the bottom, I found a small cave formed by overhanging rocks. It wasn't much, but it was my only chance. I squeezed into the tiny space, pressing myself as far back as I could. Moments later, I heard my pursuers reach the top of the ravine. Where'd he go? One of them snarled. He's got to be down there somewhere. No way he outran us, another replied. I held my breath as I heard them scrambling down the slow. Pebbles and dirt rained down, some falling into my hiding spot. I prayed they wouldn't look too closely for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The men searched the area. I could hear them just feet away, kicking at bushes and peering into crevices. My whole body was tense, ready to spring into action if I was discovered. Finally, mercifully, I heard one of them call out, he ain't here. Must have kept going downstream. Let's go. Their footsteps faded away, but I didn't move. I stayed in that cramped, dark space until my muscles screamed in protest, and the light filtering through the trees began to fade. Only then did I dare to emerge. My legs were shaky as I climbed out of the ravine. Every sound made me jump, convinced the men were about to reappear. But the forest remained quiet, save for the normal evening sounds of birds and insects. I knew I couldn't risk trying to find my way back to the trailhead in the dark. Those men were still out there, probably watching the trails. My only option was to keep moving through the night, putting as much distance between myself and their camp as possible. As darkness fell, the forest became a different world. Shadows played tricks on my eyes. Every tree, street, or oddly shaped rock taking on a menacing form. The hooting of an owl nearly gave me a heart attack, but still I pressed on. I walked through the night using the stars to keep my bearings. By the time the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, I was exhausted, hungry, and completely lost, but I was alive. As the sun rose, I finally allowed myself to stop and rest. Slumping against a tree, I took stock of my situation. My water bottle was nearly empty, I had no food, and I had no idea where I was, but I was far from those men and their camp, and that was what mattered. Just as I was considering my next move, I heard a sound that made my heart leap. The distant of helicopter blades search and rescue. They must have been alerted when I didn't return to my car. I ran to the nearest clearing, waving my arms frantically as the helicopter came into view. When it spotted me and began to descend, I felt a wave of relief, so strong it nearly knocked me off my feet. The debriefing with the park rangers and local police was a blur. I told them about the camp, the armed men, the chase through the woods. They nodded grimly, explaining that they'd been tracking a group of squatters who'd been terrorizing hikers in the area for months. "You're lucky," one of the rangers said. "Not everyone who's run into those guys has made it out." As I was driven back to my car, I couldn't help but reflect on the experience. In the span of 25 hours, I'd gone from a peaceful hike to a terrifying fight for survival. I'd faced danger head-on and come out the other side. The forest had always been my sanctuary, a place of peace and adventure. Now it held a new dimension, one of danger and unpredictability. But strangely, this didn't diminish my love for the outdoors. If anything, it deepened my respect for nature and its untamed power. As I pulled out of the parking lot heading home, I knew I'd be back, not to that specific trail perhaps, but to the woods in general, because while the experience had been terrifying, it had also shown me something about myself. I was stronger, more resourceful, and braver than I'd ever known. The next time I laced up my hiking boots, I'd be more prepared, more aware, but I'd also be more alive, more in tune with the raw, wild heart of nature. Because sometimes it's in our darkest moments that we truly find ourselves. And as for those men in the woods, the police assured me they'd be looking into it, but part of me knew that the forest held many secrets, and some of them would never come to light. All I could do was be grateful for my narrow escape and carry the lessons I had learned with me on all my future adventures. The first time I saw the van, I dismissed it as just another vehicle on my street. By the third night, I knew something was terribly wrong. Little did I know this innocuous-looking vehicle would become the focal point of a nightmare that would consume my life and push me to the very edge of insanity. My name is Sarah, and until a month ago, I led a perfectly ordinary life. I'm a 32-year-old graphic designer living alone in a small house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. My days were filled with work, my evenings with Netflix, and the occasional night out with friends. It was a simple life, but it was mine, and I was content. That all changed on a Tuesday evening in late October. I was coming home from a late night at the office, my mind preoccupied with deadlines and client meetings. As I pulled into my driveway, my headlights swept across an unfamiliar van parked across the street. It was a nondescript white panel van, the kind used by countless businesses and contractors. I didn't think much of it at the time. New neighbors perhaps, or someone visiting a friend on the street. I went inside, made a quick dinner, and forgot all about it. The next night the van was there again, same spot, same time. A coincidence, I told myself, but as I was getting ready for bed, I happened to glance out my bedroom window. The van was still there, and I could have sworn I saw movement inside. A chill ran down my spine, but I shook it off. I was just being paranoid. By the third night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The van was there again, and this time I was sure I saw someone sitting in the driver's seat. I stood at my living room window peering through a gap in the curtains, my heart pounding. Who are they? What did they want? I debated calling the police, but what would I say? There's a van parked on my street. It wasn't illegal, and I had no proof they were doing anything wrong, so I did nothing, hoping it would go away on its own. It didn't. Days turned into weeks, and the van became a constant presence in my life. It wasn't always there during the day, but every night without fail it would appear. Sometimes it parked across the street, sometimes a few houses down, but always within sight of my home. I began to change my routine. I started closing all my curtains. As soon as I got home, I stopped sitting on my front porch in the evenings. I even began to vary the times I left for work and came home, hoping to throw off whoever was watching me. But no matter what I did, the van was always there waiting, watching. My friends told me I was overreacting. It's probably just a coincidence. They'd say maybe it's a work van for someone on the street, but they didn't see the way the van would sometimes move to keep me in sight. When I went for a walk, they didn't feel the weight of unseen eyes following their every move. I tried to document it. I started taking pictures of the van, noting down the times it arrived and left, but it was always careful to park just far enough away that I couldn't make out the license plate, and whenever I tried to approach it, it would drive away only to return later. The constant stress began to take its toll. I couldn't sleep, jumping at every sound in the night. Dark circles appeared under my eyes, and my work began to suffer. I became jumpy and irritable, snapping at friends and coworkers over the smallest things. One night, about 3 weeks into this ordeal, I reached my breaking point. It was around 2 a.m. Tears, and I was lying in bed wide awake as usual. Suddenly, I heard a car door slam. I rushed to the window, my heart in my throat. The van was there, closer than ever before, parked right in front of my house, and someone was getting out. Panic seized me. This was it, whatever they had been planning. It was happening now. With shaking hands, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone outside my house, I whispered, afraid they might hear me. They've been watching me for weeks, and now they're here. Ma'am, can you see the person? Are they trying to break? And I peered out the window again. The figure was just standing there next to the van, looking up at my house. No, they're just standing there. But please, you have to send someone. I'm scared. All right, ma'am, we're dispatching officers to your location now. Stay on the line with me. Okay. Those next few minutes were the longest of my life. I huddled by the window, watching the silent figure outside, praying for the police to arrive. When I finally saw the flash of blue and red lights, I nearly cried with relief. 2 police cars pulled up, and officers quickly approached the van and the person standing beside it. I couldn't hear what was being said, but after a few minutes, one of the officers came to my door. Ma'am, can you come out here, please? Cautiously, I stepped outside. The figure by the van turned to look at me, and I gasped. It was a woman, probably in her mid-40s, with a tired, hunted look on her face. Do you know this woman? The officer asked me. I shook my head, confused. No, I've never seen her before. But that van has been watching my house for weeks. The woman spoke up, her voice trembling. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to scare you. It's just you look so much like her, like mine. Emily, the officer gently explained. The woman's name was Karen. Her daughter Emily had gone missing 3 years ago. Emily, who apparently bore a striking resemblance to me, had last been seen in this neighborhood. Karen had been driving around night after night, hoping for a glimpse of her daughter or some clue to her whereabouts. I stood there stunned. All this time, I had been terrified of a grieving mother desperately searching for her lost child. The relief I felt was quickly replaced by a deep, aching sadness. I'm so sorry, I said to Karen. I had no idea. I don't know what I thought. Karen nodded, tears in her eyes. I understand. I should have just talked to you. I was just so scared of losing hope again. The police took statements from both of us. They gently but firmly told Karen that she couldn't continue her nightly vigils as it was causing distress. They gave her information on support groups and other resources for families of missing persons. As Karen was about to leave, I did something I never expected. I walked up to her and gave her a hug. She stiffened for a moment, then melted into it, sobbing quietly. "I hope you find her," I whispered. The van never appeared on my street again after that night, but the experience left a lasting impact on me. I had spent weeks living in fear, jumping at shadows, seeing threats where there were none, and all the while the real story was one of heartbreak and desperate hope. I found myself thinking about Karen and Emily often. I even attended a few meetings of the support group the police had recommended, hoping to see Karen there. She never came, but listening to the stories of other families of missing persons gave me a new perspective on my own experience. In the end, my nightmare turned out to be someone else's ongoing tragedy. It made me realize how easy it is to misinterpret things, to let fear and paranoia twist our perceptions. But it also showed me the depth of apparent love, the length someone will go to for the slimmest chance of finding a lost loved one. I still live in the same house, on the same quiet street, but now, when I look out my window at night, I don't see threats lurking in the shadows. Instead, I see a world full of stories, some scary, some sad, but all uniquely human. And I'm reminded that sometimes the thing we fear the most is simply someone else's pain. Looking for a place to heal. The dashboard clock blinked 11:47 p.m. As I pulled onto the empty highway. The full moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the desolate landscape. I had had no idea that in just a few minutes my routine late-night drive would turn into a terrifying game of cat and mouse that would push me to my limits. My name's Mike, and I work the night shift at a warehouse about an hour outside of town. It's not the most exciting job, but it pays the bills, and I've always been a bit of a night owl anyway. The drive home is usually uneventful, just me, my thoughts, and miles of empty road stretching out before me. That night started like any other. I was tired after a long shift, looking forward to crawling into bed and sleeping until noon. The radio was playing softly, some late-night talk show discussing conspiracy theories. I wasn't really listening, my mind already half asleep. About 20 minutes into my drive, I noticed my gas gauge was hovering dangerously close to empty, cursing under my breath. I started scanning the roadside for any signs of a gas station out here in the boonies. They were few and far between, especially at this hour. Just when I was starting to worry I might end up stranded, I saw a faint glow in the distance. As I got closer, I made out the shape of an old rundown gas station. The sign was flickering, half the letters burnt out, but it was open. Beggars can't be choosers, I thought to myself as I pulled into place. Looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. A single pump stood sentinel in the cracked concrete lot, and the small convenience store attached to it had bars on the windows, but the lights were on, and I could see movement inside. Relief washed over me as I got out to fill up. As I was pumping gas, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. You know that feeling when you're being watched? It was like that, but 100 times stronger. I looked around trying to shake off the sensation, but there was empty, safe for my car, and an old pickup truck parked near the store. I finished and went inside to pay. The bell above the door jingled cheerfully, a stark contrast to the gloomy interior. Behind the counter stood a man who looked as old and weathered as the station itself, his roomy eyes fixed on me as I approached, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Evening, I said, trying to keep my voice casual. Just the gas on pump one, please. He nodded, slowly ringing me up without a word. As I handed over my cash, I noticed his hands were stained with something dark. Grease, I told myself, must be from working on cars. but a little voice in the back of my head whispered that it looked an awful lot like dried blood. Long drive ahead of you, the old man asked, his voice rough as gravel. You know, just heading home, I replied, eager to get out of there. About 40 minutes down the road. He nodded again, a strange glint in his eye. Drive safe now, lot of crazy folks out on these roads at night. I mumbled a thanks and practically ran back to my car. As I pulled out of the station, I saw the old man watching me from the window. I shuddered and pressed down on the accelerator, wanting to put as much distance between me and that creepy place as possible. About 10 minutes down the road, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it, but as the minutes ticked by, I realized the car behind me was keeping pace, never falling back or trying to pass. My palms started to sweat as I gripped the steering wheel tighter. It's nothing, I told myself, probably just someone going the same way. But the little voice in my head, the one that had noticed the stains on the old man's hands and wasn't buying it. I decided to test my theory. I slowed down a bit, and sure enough, the car behind me slowed too. I sped up, and it matched my speed perfectly. My heart started to race. This wasn't a coincidence. I tried to get a better look at the car in my mirrors, but all I could make out was that it was a large, dark-colored vehicle, possibly the pickup I had seen at the gas station. The thought made my blood run cold. For the next 10 minutes, I tried every trick I could think of to lose my tail. I varied my speed. I took random turns onto side roads. I even considered pulling over and confronting them, but every time I thought I'd lost them, those headlights would appear in my mirror again. I was starting to panic. My hands were shaking, and I could feel sweat trickling down my back. I needed help, but out here there was no one to call. My cell phone showed no signal, and I hadn't seen another car on the road for miles. Suddenly the car behind me sped up, pulling alongside me. I risked a glance over and saw the pickup from the gas station. The driver's face was hidden in shadow, but I could make out the silhouette of the old man from the store in the passenger seat. The pickup started to edge closer, trying to run me off the road. I swerved, narrowly avoiding a collision. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. What did these people want? Why were they after me? In desperation, I forded my old sedan, protested the engine whining as I pushed it to its left limits. The speedometer crept past 90, then 100. The world outside became a blur. The yellow line on the road, a continuous streak. The pickup fell behind for a moment, but then I heard the roar of its engine as it gained on me again. These guys weren't going to give up easily. Up ahead, I saw it turn off, but without thinking, I yanked the wheel hard, sending my car skidding onto the unpaved road. The pickup overshot the turn, buying me a few precious seconds. The dirt road was rough, and my car bounced and shuddered as I raced down it. Branches whipped at my windshield, and more than once I thought I was going to lose control, but fear kept my foot pressed firmly on the gas pedal. I could hear the pickup behind me getting closer. By the second, panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced myself to focus. There had to be a way out of this. Just when I thought all hope was lost, I saw lights in the distance. As I got closer, I realized it was a small town, houses, street lights, maybe even people who could help me. I'd never been so happy to see civilization in my life. I burst out onto the main street, tires squealing. The few people still out at this hour stopped and stared as I careened past. In my rearview mirror, I saw the pickup emergency from the dirt road, but instead of following me into town, it slowed, then turned around and disappeared back the way it came. I didn't stop driving until I reached the local police station. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely put the car in park. I stumbled inside, probably looking like a madman, and blurted out my story to the bewildered officer at the desk. To their credit, the police took me seriously. They took my statement and sent out patrols to look for the pickup and to check out the gas station. but they never found anything. The gas station was abandoned when they got there, looking like it hadn't been used in years. I spent the next few weeks jumping at every shadow, convinced that the old man and his partner were going to come after me again. I changed my route home from work, bought a new car, even considered moving, but as time passed and nothing happened, I slowly started to relax. To this day, I don't know what those men wanted or why they chased me. Was it just a twisted game to them? Were they going to rob me, or worse? I'll never know for sure, but one thing's certain: I never drive on lonely highways at night anymore, and I always make sure I have a full tank of gas before I leave home. Sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I can still hear the roar of that pickup's engine behind me. It's a reminder that danger can come from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the difference between safety and terror is just a wrong turn on a dark, lonely road. The flickering neon sign read vacancy in faded red letters, a beacon of hope in the pitch-black Cayenne. I pulled into the nearly empty parking lot, my eyelids heavy from hours of driving. Little did I know checking into this rundown motel would be the beginning of the most terrifying night of my life. My name's Jack, and I'm a traveling salesman. Not the most glamorous job, but it pays the bills and lets me see parts of the country I'd never visit otherwise. This particular trip had me crossing 3 states and as many days, pitching our company's latest product to anyone who'd listen. It was well past midnight when I finally admitted defeat and started looking for a place to crash. I was in the middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest city, and my GPS was being less than helpful. So when I saw the sign for the Pine View Motel, I felt like I'd hit the jackpot. The place had seen better days. That much was clear. The paint was peeling half the exterior, lights were burned out, and the parking lot was more potholes than pavement. But at that point, I would have slept in my car if it meant I could close my eyes for a few hours. I parked in front of the office and went inside. A bell above the door jangled discordantly, announcing my arrival to the empty room. The place smelled of stale cigarette smoke and something else I couldn't quite place, something sour and unpleasant. "Hello," I called out, leaning over the counter to peer into the back room. "Anyone here?" After a moment, I heard shuffling footsteps. An old man emerged from the back, blinking at me like he'd just woken up, which, given the hour, he probably had need a room. He grunted, already reaching for a key. I nodded, stifling a yawn. "Just for the night. I'll be heading out first thing in the morning." He handed me a key attached to a faded plastic fob. "Room 13, great, that'll be $40. He said, his roomy eyes fixed on me. "Cash only." I handed over 220s, trying not to touch his gnarled hands. He pocketed the money without bothering with the ancient cash register on the counter. "Checkouts at 11. He mumbled, already shuffling back towards the rear of the office. "No refunds." And with that he was gone, leaving me alone in the musty office. I shrugged off the uneasy feeling settling in my stomach and headed back to my car to grab my overnight bag. Room 13 was at the far end of the building, tucked away in a corner. The key stuck in the lock, and I had to jiggle it a few times before the door finally swung open with a creak that would have done any horror movie proud. The room was about what I expected: small, dingy, with furniture that had probably been old when Nixon was president. But the bed looked clean enough, and that was all I cared about at that point. I dropped my bag, kicked off my shoes, and flopped onto the bed without bothering to change. I was asleep almost before my head hit the pillow. I'm not sure how long I slept before the noise woke me. At first, in my groggy state, I thought it was just part of a dream, a soft scratching sound like fingernails on wood. But as I became more awake, I realized it was coming from the door. I sat up, my heart suddenly pounding. The scratching continued, growing more insistent. Then, to my horror, I heard the door knob start to turn. I'd locked the door, hadn't I? I was sure I had. but the knob kept turning slowly, deliberately. I was frozen, unable to move, as the door began to open. A sliver of dim light from the parking lot cut through the darkness of the room, and then I saw a hand, pale and skeletal, curling around the edge of the door that broke my paralysis. I leapt out of bed, slamming my body against the door, and fumbling with the chain lock. The hand withdrew quickly, and I heard a hiss of frustration from the other side. "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "I've called the police." Silence, then footsteps retreating. I stayed pressed against the door, my heart racing, straining to hear any sound. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I summoned the courage to look through the peephole. The walkway outside was empty. I spent the rest of the night huddled in a corner, the desk lamp on, and my pocket knife clutched in my sweaty hand. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind had me on edge. I didn't dare try to leave. Whoever or whatever had tried to get in might still be out there. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the grimy window, I finally felt safe enough to move. I packed my bag with shaking hands, eager to get out of this place and put as many miles between me and room 13 as possible. I opened the door cautiously, half expecting to see someone or something waiting for me, but the walkway was empty, the parking lot deserted save for my car and an old pickup truck I assumed belonged to the manager. I made a beeline for my car, tossing my bag in the back seat and fumbling with my keys. Just as I was about to get in, a voice behind me made me jump. Leaving so soon? I whirled around to see the old manager standing there in the harsh morning light. He looked even more decrepit than he had the night before. His skin was pale and waxy, his eyes sunken and lifeless. "I have to get an early start," I stammered, fighting the urge to jump in my car and speed away. He nodded slowly, a strange smile spreading across his face. "Shame. We so rarely get visitors these days." Something in the way he said "we" sent a chill down my spine. I mumbled a goodbye and practically dove into my car, peeling out of the parking lot fast enough to leave tire marks. As I sped down the highway, my hand shaking on the steering wheel, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd narrowly escaped something truly sinister. What would have happened if that door had opened? Who or what had tried to get into my room? I drove for hours, not stopping, until I was several states away, even then at a busy truck stop in broad daylight. I couldn't relax. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the pale hand reaching around the door. I called the local police. When I finally reached my destination, reporting what had happened, they took my statement, but I could tell they didn't really believe me. To be honest, in the light of day, I was having trouble believing it myself. A few weeks later, I received a call from a detective. They had investigated the Pine View Motel and found it abandoned. According to county records, it had been closed for years. The detective asked if I was sure about the location, if maybe I had confused it with another motel. But I knew what I had seen, what I had experienced. That hand reaching around the door was burned into my memory. I quit my job as a traveling salesman soon after. Couldn't handle the long drives, the nights in strange motels. Now I work a desk job in the city, and I sleep in my own bed every night. But sometimes, when I'm lying awake in the dark, I swear I can hear that scratching at my door, and I wonder, with a chill running down my spine, if whatever was in room 13 followed me home. I'll never know for sure what happened that night at the Pineview Motel. Was it a vivid nightmare brought on by exhaustion, a hallucination, or something more sinister, something that defies explanation? All I know is that I'll never again pull into a deserted motel on a dark, lonely highway. Some vacancies are better left unfilled. The old factory loomed before me, a hulking silhouette against the night sky. Its broken windows stared down like vacant eyes, hiding secrets I was about to uncover. As I fumbled with the ancient lock on the gate, I had no idea that my first night as a security guard would thrust me into a terrifying confrontation with dangers both human and possibly something else. My name's Tom, and I'd taken this job out of desperation. The economy had hit our town hard, and with a baby on the way, I couldn't afford to be picky. When I saw the ad for a night security guard at the abandoned Millbrook factory, it seemed like easy money. Just patrol an empty building for 8 hours, right? How wrong I was. The lock finally gave way with a rusty groan, and I slipped inside the factory grounds. The place had been shut down for years, its machinery silent, and its workforce long gone now. It was just a playground for vandals and urban explorers, or so I'd been told during my brief training. My flashlight cut through the darkness as I made my way to the small security office near the main entrance. It was a cramped space barely larger than a closet, with a desk, a chair, and a bank of old CCTV monitors that flickered to life. When I flipped the switch, most of the cameras were dead, their screens showing nothing but static, but a few still worked, offering grainy black and white views of empty corridors and abandoned assembly lines. I settled into the creaky chair, trying to ignore the musty smell that permeated everything. The first few hours of my shift passed uneventfully. I alternated between watching the monitors and doing rounds of the ground floor, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The only sounds were the occasional skittering of rats and the groan of the old building settling. It was around 2 a.m. when I first heard it, a soft thud, like something heavy being dropped coming from the upper floors. I froze, my flashlight beam dancing across the walls as I tried to pinpoint the source. Probably just some debris falling, I muttered to myself, but my heart was racing. I knew I should go check it out. It was my job after all, but the thought of climbing those dark stairs filled me with dread. I forced myself to move, my hand resting on the taser at my hip for reassurance. As I ascended the stairs, each creak of the old wood sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. The second floor was even darker than the first, the moonlight barely penetrating the grime-covered windows. That's when I saw it, a flicker of movement at the end of the corridor. I swung my flashlight in that direction, but whatever it was had already disappeared around the corner. Hello, I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. This is security. If someone's there, come out now. Silence, then unmistakably the sound of footsteps, but they weren't coming towards me. They were moving away deeper into the factory. I followed, my curiosity overriding my fear. As I turned the corner, I caught a glimpse of a figure disappearing into one of the old offices. It looked like a man, but something about the way it moved, man. But as my flashlight illuminated him, I realized with horror that he wasn't alone. Two more figures appeared, their eyes glinting in the harsh beam of light. Well, the first man said, his voice growly. Looks like we've got company, boys. I took a step back, my hand gripping the taser. I'm armed, security, I warned, trying to sound more confident. Then I felt, you need to leave the premises immediately. The man laughed, a harsh sound that sent chills down my spine. Oh, we ain't going nowhere. See, we've got a nice little operation set up here, and we can't have you messing it up. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could see that the office had been transformed into some kind of makeshift lab. Bottles, tubes, and other equipment I didn't recognize cluttered every surface. The acrid smell of chemicals hung in the air. My mind raced. A drug lab. I'd stumbled into a damn drug lab. Listen, I said, holding up my free hand in what I hoped was a calming gesture. I don't want any trouble. Why don't we all just walk away from this? I didn't see anything. The leader, at least I assumed he was the leader, shook his head slowly. Can't do that, friend. You've seen too much already. He nodded to his companions, and they started to spread out, flanking me. I knew I was in serious trouble. 3 against 1, and they had the home field advantage. I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. I bolted from the office, my feet pounding on the old floorboards as I raced back toward The stairs, I could hear them behind me, their shouts echoing off the walls. As I reached the stairwell, I risked a glance back and saw the glint of metal in one of their hands, a knife, or maybe a gun. I took the stairs two at a time, nearly falling in my haste. I had to get back to the security office. There was a phone there, my cell didn't get reception. In this concrete maze, I burst out onto the ground floor and sprinted towards the office behind me. I could hear my pursuers reaching the bottom of the stairs. I slammed the office door shut behind me and wedged a chair under the handle, knowing it wouldn't hold for long. With shaking hands, I grabbed the phone and dialed 911. As it rang, I could hear the men outside. Their voice is getting closer. 911, what's your emergency? This is security at Millbrook Factory. I gasped. There are intruders. They're trying to kill me. Please send help. I quickly gave them the address, the dispatcher assuring me the units were on their way. But as I hung up, I knew the police might not get here in time. The door shuttered as someone slammed into it. The chair creaked ominously. I looked around desperately for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself. My eyes fell on the bank of monitors, and an idea formed. I grabbed the heaviest monitor and yanked it free, trailing cables behind it. Just as the door burst open, I swung it with all my might. It connected with the leader's head. With a sickening crunch, he went down hard, the other two stumbling over him as they tried to enter the small space. I didn't wait to see if he got up. I shoved past the others, using the bulky monitor as a battering ram. They fell back, momentarily stunned, and I seized my chance. I ran like I'd never run before, out of the factory and into the cool night air. I could hear sirens in the distance, growing louder by the second. I didn't stop running until I reached the gate, wrenching it open and bursting out onto the street just as the first police car rounded the corner. The next few hours were a blur of police statements and paramedics checking me over. The cops found the drug lab and arrested two of the men, but the leader had managed to slip away in the chaos. As dawn broke, I sat on the curb, a shock blanket draped over my shoulders, watching the police and crime scene tech swarm over the factory. My wife arrived, her face pale with worry, and I held her close, feeling the gentle swell of her pregnant belly against me. I quit the security job that day. No amount of money was worth risking my life, risking the future of my family. But the experience changed me. I realized how quickly a seemingly safe situation could turn deadly, how thin the line was between ordinary life and mortal danger. Months later, as I held my newborn daughter in my arms, I thought back to that night at the factory. I had faced my fears, outwitted dangerous men, and survived, and now looking into my child's eyes, I knew I'd find the strength to face whatever challenges life might throw at me. But still, sometimes in the dead of night, I wake up in a cold sweat, hearing phantom footsteps and seeing shadowy figures in the corners of our bedroom. The old factory may be behind me, but its ghosts linger on, a reminder of the night. I stared into the face of true terror and lived to tell the tale. The soft glow of my phone screen illuminated the dimly lit living room. As I scrolled through the online marketplace, a familiar ping caught my attention, a notification for a second-hand stroller, exactly what I'd been searching for. Little did I know that this seemingly innocent purchase would plunge me into a nightmare that would leave me questioning every interaction, every shadow, and every moment of silence. I'm Sarah, a 28-year-old first-time mom living in the suburbs of Chicago. My daughter Emma had just turned 3 months old, and between the sleepless nights and the constant worry that comes with new parenthood, I was always on the lookout for ways to make our lives a little easier and a little more affordable. The stroller looked perfect in the photos, barely used, half the price of a new one. And just a short drive away, the seller Susan seemed friendly enough. In our messages, we arranged to meet at her apartment the next day. I remember feeling a twinge of unease As I pulled up to the address, the neighborhood was a bit rougher than I was used to, all concrete and graffiti-covered walls. But I pushed the feeling aside. After all, not everyone could afford to live in the nicer parts of town, right? Susan's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a rundown building. The elevator was out of order, so I had to lug Emma's car seat up 3 flights of stairs. By the time I reached Susan's door, I was out of breath and second-guessing my decision to come alone. But Susan was all smiles. When she opened the door, she said over Emma, showing me the stroller, and even throwing in some baby clothes. Her daughter had outgrown the whole transaction. Took less than 15 minutes, and I left feeling pleased with my bargain. It wasn't until I got home that things started to feel off. First, it was a text from Susan asking if I'd made it home safely. Nice enough, I supposed. If a bit odd, I replied with a quick thanks, thinking that would be the end of it, but the texts kept coming every day, sometimes multiple times a day. How was I finding the stroller? Did Emma like it? How was Emma doing? Was I getting enough sleep? At first, I tried to be polite, answering her questions briefly, but as the days went on, the messages became more frequent, more personal. She asked about our daily routines, what time Emma usually napped, if I ever took her to the park near our house. That last one made me pause. I'd never told her where we lived. I started to notice other things too. A car I didn't recognize parked across the street from our house, always in the same spot. I'd see it when I left for my morning walk with Emma, and it would still be there when we returned one evening. As I was putting Emma to bed, I glanced out the window and saw a man standing by the car, staring up at our apartment. My blood ran cold. I quickly closed the blinds and called my friend Lisa, my hand shaking as I dialed. Lisa offered to come over, but I told her it was probably nothing. I didn't want to seem paranoid, but that night I checked all the locks and slept with Emma's bassinet next to my bed. The next day, I went to the grocery store, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that had settled over me. As I was loading the groceries into my car, I saw the same car from our street parked a few spaces away. The man inside was watching me, my heart racing. I hurried to get Emma into her car seat and drove home as fast as I safely could, constantly checking my rearview mirror. The car followed me the entire way. That night, I heard noises outside my window, soft thuds, like footsteps in the flower bed. When I peeked through the blinds, I saw 2 men in my yard trying to break into my car. I called the police, my voice barely above a whisper. As I explained the situation, they arrived quickly, but the men were gone by the time they got there. The officers took my report and promised to patrol the area more often. The next day, I got a text from an unknown number. "We know where you live, don't call the cops again." Panic set, and I called Lisa, finally telling her everything. She insisted I come stay with her for a while. I packed a bag for Emma and me, and we left that night at Lisa's place. I felt safer, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I kept getting texts from different numbers, each one more threatening than the last. I changed my phone number, but somehow they kept finding me. I went to the police again, showing them the text and telling them about Susan and the stroller. They took me more seriously this time, assigning a detective to my case. He suggested I stay somewhere else for a while and promised to look into Susan and the men who had been following me. Lisa and I decided to go to her parents' a cabin in Wisconsin. It was remote, off the grid, the perfect place to hide out until the police could sort things out. For a few weeks things were quiet. The cabin was peaceful, surrounded by woods and a small lake. Emma seemed to thrive in the fresh air, and I started to relax, thinking maybe the worst was behind us. But one night, I woke up to the sound of a car outside, my heart pounding. I peeked out the window and saw the same car that had been parked outside my apartment in Chicago. They had found us. I shook Lisa awake, trying to keep my voice low as I explained. We grabbed Emma and hid in the bathroom, the only room in the cabin without windows. I called 911, whispering our location and situation to the dispatcher. We could hear them trying to break in. The sound of splintering would echoing through the small cabin. Emma started to cry, and I held her close, trying to muffle her sobs against my chest. The minutes felt like hours as we waited for help to arrive. Every sound from outside of the bathroom door made us flinch. Were they in the cabin? How long before they found us? Just when I thought all hope was lost, we heard sirens, the sound of running footsteps, then shouts, and a brief scuffle. Finally, a knock on the bathroom door, and a voice, "Police, you can come out now." We emerged to find the cabin in disarray, but we were safe. The police had caught one of the men trying to break in. After questioning him, they uncovered a whole network of criminals using online marketplaces to find victims. Susan, it turned out, wasn't Susan at all. She was part of a gang that specialized in identity theft and home invasions. They used the stroller sale as a way to get information about potential targets, families with young children who might have valuable items or personal information to steal. The man they caught gave up the rest of the gang, including the real Susan, whose identity they had stolen. They were all arrested and charged with multiple crimes. In the weeks that followed, we moved to a new apartment in a different part of the city. I installed a top-of-the-line security system and took self-defense classes. I became more cautious about online interactions and more aware of my surroundings, but the experience left its mark. Even now, months later, I still find myself checking the locks multiple times before bed, jumping at unexpected noises, and scrutinizing every unfamiliar car on our street. The world feels different now, less safe, but it's also made me stronger, more resilient. I know now that I can face my fears, that I'll do whatever it takes to protect my daughter. As I watch Emma play in our new living room, blissfully unaware of the danger we faced, I'm reminded of how precious and fragile our safety can be, but I'm also filled with a fierce determination. We survived, we're together, and no matter what life throws at us next, we'll face it. Heat in the stroller that started it all sits in a corner, a reminder of how quickly life can change, but it's also a symbol of our resilience, of the strength we found in the face of terror. And as I pick up Emma and hold her close, I know that whatever challenges come our way, we'll overcome them together. The snap of a twig echoed through the forest, freezing me in my tracks. My heart pounded as I scanned the dense undergrowth, searching for the source of the sound. That's when I saw him, a small boy no more than 8 years old, limping towards us with tears streaming down his dirt-smeared face. In that moment, I had no idea that this child would lead us into a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. My name's Mike, and I've been an avid hiker for most of my adult life. This particular trip was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway with my best friends Sarah and Tom. We'd chosen a secluded trail in the Adra, far from the usual tourist spots. The promise of untouched nature and peaceful solitude had drawn us in. If only we'd known what was really waiting for us in those woods. We'd been hiking for about 6 hours. When we first heard the crying, it was faint at first, easily mistaken for the wind or some animal. But as we continued down the trail, it became clearer, unmistakably human and undeniably distressed. "Do you guys hear that?" Sarah asked, her brow furrowed with concern. Tom nodded, already veering off the trail towards the sound. "Sounds like a kid. We should check it out." That's when we saw him emerge from behind a large oak tree. He was small and skinny, his clothes torn and dirty, his left leg dragged slightly as he walked, and his face was a mess of tears and mud. "Hey there," I said softly, approaching him slowly. "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" The boy's lower lip trembled as he spoke. "I fell, my leg hurts." I can't find my way back to my family." Sarah knelt beside him, her nurse's instincts kicking in as she examined his leg. "It doesn't look broken, but he shouldn't be walking on it. We need to get him some help." "What's your name, buddy?" Tom asked, rummaging in his backpack. "For the first aid kit, Jimmy." The boy sniffled. "Please, can you help me find my family? They must be so worried." We exchanged glances, a silent agreement passing between us. Of course, we would help him. How could we not? "Don't worry, Jimmy," I assured him. "We'll get you back to your family." "Can you tell us where you last saw them?" Jimmy pointed deeper into the forest, one away from the trail. "We were camping over there by a big rock shaped like a bear." I felt a twinge of unease. Camping off trail was risky, especially with a child. But I pushed the thought aside. Right now, our priority was getting this kid back to his parents, with Sarah supporting Jimmy on one side and Tom on the other. We set off in the direction he'd indicated. I took the lead, using my hiking pole to clear a path through the dense underbrush. As we walked, Jimmy told us about his family's camping trip, how he'd wandered off to explore and gotten lost. His story seemed to change slightly with each telling, but I chalked it up to the stress of the situation. Kids often got confused when they were scared. We'd been walking for about 10 minutes when I started to feel like something was off. The forest had gone quiet. No birds, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, just an eerie, oppressive silence. "Guys," I said, keeping my voice low, "does something feel weird to you?" Before they could answer, Jimmy spoke up. "We're almost there. It's just past those trees." We pushed through a thick cluster of pines and found ourselves in a small clearing. In the center stood a large rock formation that did indeed resemble a bear, but there was no sign of a campsite, no tents, no fire pit, nothing to indicate anyone had been here recently. "Jimmy," Sarah said gently, "are you sure this is the right place?" The boy nodded vigorously. "Yes, this is it. They must be looking for me." "Dad, Mom, I'm here." His shout echoed through the clearing, seeming to bounce off every tree. And then from the other side of the clearing we heard a response. But it wasn't the relieved cry of worried parents. It was laughter, cold, harsh laughter that sent chills down my spine. 3 men emerged from the trees. They were rough-looking, with unkempt beards and cold eyes. Each carried a rifle, held with the casual ease of someone very familiar with their weapon. "Well done, Jimmy," one of them said, his voice gruff. "You brought us some nice prizes." My blood ran cold as I realized the trap we'd walked into. Jimmy wasn't lost, he was bait. "What's going on here?" Tom demanded, pushing Sarah and Jimmy behind him. The man who'd spoken clearly, the leader, grinned. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "What's going on is that you folks are going to hand over all your gear, your money, and anything else of value. Then maybe if you're cooperative, we'll let you walk out of here." I felt Sarah's hand grip my arm tightly. My mind raced, trying to find a way out of this nightmare. We were outnumbered and unarmed. Our phones had no signal this deep in the woods. We were completely alone. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Okay, we'll give you what we have. Just don't hurt anyone." The leader nodded to his companion, who approached us with predatory grins as they began rifling through our backpacks. I caught Tom's eye. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. We'd been friends long enough to communicate without words. He had a plan. It happened in an instant. As one of the men reached for Sarah's pack, Tom suddenly yelled, "Run!" and shoved the man hard. The guy stumbled, falling into his companion. We didn't hesitate. We ran crashing through the underbrush with no regard for the trail or direction. All that mattered was putting distance between us and those men. Gunshots rang out behind us, bullets splintering tree trunks inches from our heads. Sarah screamed, and I grabbed her hand, pulling her along. "Don't stop," I yelled. "Keep going." We ran until our lungs burned and our legs felt like jelly. The sounds of pursuit had faded, but we didn't slow down. Fear gave us speed we didn't know we possessed. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, we stumbled onto a dirt road. In the distance, we could see a small gas station. Gasping for breath, we staggered into the store. The clerk looked alarmed at our appearance scratched dirty, and wild-eyed pleased, I managed between gulps of air call the police. We were attacked in the woods. The next few hours were and paramedics checking us over. As the adrenaline wore off, the reality of what had happened began to sink, and we'd narrowly escaped being robbed, or worse, the police organized a search of the area, but found no sign of the men or the boy. They told us this wasn't the first report they'd had of hikers being lured off trail and robbed, but it was the first time they'd heard of a child being used as bait. In the days and weeks that followed, I found myself jumping at every unexpected noise, seeing danger in every shadow. The forest, once a place of peace and adventure for me, now seemed full of hidden threats. But as time passed, I refused to let fear control my life. I started hiking again, but never alone, and always with extra precautions. I took self-defense classes and became more aware of my surroundings. The experience changed me, made me more cautious, but also more appreciative of the kindness of strangers, because for every person out there willing to do harm, there are many more ready to help. I often think about Jimmy, wondering about his story. Was he a willing participant in the scam, or another victim? I'll probably never know, but I hope that wherever he is, he found a way out of that life. As for me, I still love the outdoors, but now, when I lace up my hiking boots and hit the trail, I carry with me not just supplies, but a keen awareness of both the beauty and the potential dangers that lie in the wilderness. Every rustle in the bushes, every snap twig brings a moment of tension, but I push through it, refusing to let one terrible experience rob me of something I love. The forest may hide dangers, but it also holds wonders, and in the end, I choose to focus on the wonders, while never forgetting the lesson I learned on that faithful day. Sometimes the most dangerous predators in the woods are the ones that walk on two legs. The shattered glass crunched under my bare feet as I fumbled for the baseball bat I kept beside my bed. My heart pounded in my chest, drowning out all other sounds except for the unmistakable footsteps of intruders in my home. In that moment, I knew my quiet suburban life had just taken a terrifying turn. My name is David, and until that night, I'd always considered myself lucky. At 35, I had a stable job, a comfortable house in a good neighborhood, and a life that was predictably safe. But as I stood there in the darkness, clutching my makeshift weapon, I realized how quickly that safety could be shattered. It was a Wednesday night, just after 2 a.m. I'd gone to bed early, exhausted from a long day at work. The sound of breaking glass jolted me awake, my mind initially struggling to process what was happening. Then I heard them hushed voices and the creak of floorboards under unfamiliar feet. Adrenaline surged through me as I reached for my phone, only to find it dead. Of course, I'd forgotten to charge it. Cursing silently, I grabbed the bat and crept towards my bedroom door, every muscle in my body tense. I could hear them in the living room now, rummaging through my things. The sound of something heavy falling made me flinch. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. Should I confront them, try to sneak out, hide, and hope they didn't come upstairs? Before I could decide, I heard footsteps on the stairs. They were coming up. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced it down. I had to think clearly. I looked around my room, searching for an escape route. The window was my best bet. It overlooked the back garden, and while it was a drop, it wasn't so high that I couldn't manage it as quietly as I could. I slid the window open. The cool night air hit my face, clearing my head a little. I was about to climb out when I heard a voice right outside my door. Check in here, someone whispered. The doorknob started to turn. I didn't think, I just acted. I lunged forward, swinging the bat with all my might. As the door opened, there was a sickening crunch and a cry of pain as it connected with something or someone. I didn't wait to see the result. I bolted past the fallen intruder, nearly tripping over him. In my haste, another man stood at the top of the stairs, his eyes wide with shock. For a split second, We just stared at each other, then he reached for something at his waist, a gun I didn't give him. Time to draw it, I charged using my momentum, and the bat to knock him off balance. We both tumbled down the stairs, a tangle of limbs and curses. Pain exploded in my shoulder as we hit the bottom, but I ignored it, scrambling to my feet. The front door was right there. Freedom was just steps away, but as I ran for it, a third man appeared, blocking my path. He was huge, easily a foot taller than me, and built like a linebacker going somewhere. He growled, advancing on me. I backed away, my eyes darting around for another escape route. The bat had been and lost in the fall down the stairs. I was unarmed, outnumbered, and quickly running out of options. That's when I saw it, the back door slightly ajar. They must have come in that way. It was my only chance. I feinted to the left, then darted right, ducking under the big man's grasping hands. I heard him curse as I slipped past, but I didn't look back. I ran for the back door, my bare feet slapping against the cold tile of the kitchen floor. I burst out into the night, the damp grass cool under my feet. The garden was dark, the high fence casting deep shadows. I could hear them behind me shouting and crashing through the house. Without thinking, I made for the fence. It was tall, but there was a tree next to it that I'd always meant to trim tonight. I was grateful for my procrastination. I scrambled up the tree, ignoring the scrapes and cuts from the rough bark. Just as I reached the top of the fence, a hand grasped my ankle. I kicked out blindly, feeling my foot connect with something solid. There was a grunt of pain, and the grip loosened. I didn't hesitate. I threw myself over the fence, landing hard on the other side. Pain shot through my ankle, but I forced myself to get up. I couldn't stop now. I was in my neighbor's yard. Old Mr. Johnson, who I'd always thought of as a grumpy nuisance with his complaints about my music being too loud, now his house represented safety. I limped to his back door, pounding on it with all my might. Help, I shouted. Please, someone help me. Lights flicked on inside, and after what felt like an eternity, Mr. Johnson appeared at the door, his eyes wide with shock. David, what on earth? Please, I gasped. Let me in. There are men. They broke into my house. They're after me. He ushered me inside, locking the door behind us. As he reached for his phone to call the police, we heard angry voices from my yard. They were searching for me. The next few hours passed in a blur. The police arrived, sirens blaring. There was a brief confrontation, shots fired. In the end, they caught two of the men. The third, the big one, managed to escape. As the adrenaline wore off, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. The police took my statement, paramedics checked me over, and finally, as dawn was breaking, I was allowed back into my house. The place was a mess, drawers upturned, furniture broken, my belongings strewn everywhere. But it was the less visible damage that affected me most. My sense of safety at home had been battered, along with my windows. In the days that followed, I couldn't sleep. Every noise made me jump, convinced they had come back. The big man was still out there somewhere. What if he came back to finish what they'd started? I installed a security system, put bars on the windows, bought a gun, but none of it made me feel truly safe. The incident had shaken me to my core, making me realize how fragile our sense of security really is. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, I started to reclaim my life. I went back to work, started going out with friends again, but I was changed, more cautious, more aware of my surroundings. I'd look at strangers and wonder, are you a threat? Are you here to hurt me? It was no way to live. Finally, I decided I needed help. I started seeing a therapist, working through my fear and anxiety. It wasn't easy, but gradually I began to feel more like myself again. One day, about 7 months after the break-in, I ran into Mr. Johnson. While getting my mail, he asked how I was doing, genuine concern in his eyes. We ended up talking for over an hour. I learned he was a Vietnam vet, that he lived alone since his wife passed, that his grumpiness was mostly loneliness. From that day on, we developed an unlikely friendship. We'd have coffee on Sundays, watch football games together. He taught me about home security, showing me how to really secure my house without turning it into a fortress. A year after the break-in, they caught the third man. He'd been involved in a string of home invasions across 3 states. When they told me, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. The night, for the first time in a year, I slept with my window open. The cool breeze and the sounds of the night no longer seemed menacing. Instead, they were a reminder that life goes on, that we can heal, that we can reclaim what fear takes from us. The break-in changed me, there's no doubt about that, but not all of those changes were bad. I'm more aware now, yes, but also more appreciative of the people around me, of the community I'm a part of. I no longer take my safety for granted, but I also don't let fear rule my life. Every now and then, when I hear an unexpected noise in the night, I still feel that flash of panic, but then I take a deep breath, remember that I'm safe, that I'm strong, that I survived, and I realize that while the world can be a dangerous place, it's also full of good people, of neighbors who open their doors in the middle of the night, of unlikely friends who help you heal. In the end, that's the lesson I choose to take from that terrifying night, not that danger lurks around every corner, but that we're stronger than we know, and that sometimes our worst experiences can lead us to our best selves. The rusty sign creaked in the wind, its faded letters barely legible. Last gas for 100 miles. As I pulled into the dilapidated gas station, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air. Something about this place felt wrong, but with my fuel gauge hovering near empty, I had no choice. I never could have imagined that this mundane pit stop would plunge me into a nightmare that would test the limits of my survival instincts. My name's Alex, and I'm a freelance photographer. I was on my way back from a shoot into the middle of nowhere, taking the scenic route through some of the most desolate parts of the country. It was the kind of lonely stretch of highway where you could drive for hours without seeing another soul. As I step out of my car, the silence hit me like a physical force. No crickets, no distant traffic, not even the hum of the old gas pumps, just an eerie, all-encompassing quiet that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The station looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. A single pump stood sentinel in the cracked concrete lot, and the small convenience store attached to it had bars on the windows, but the lights were on, and I could see movement inside, which was reassuring. I started pumping gas, keeping an eye on the store. Through the grimy windows, I could make out 3 men inside. They seemed to be arguing about something, their gestures animated and aggressive. One of them glanced out and caught me looking. The hostility in his gaze made me quickly hurt my eyes. Once the tank was full, I hesitated. I needed to go inside to pay, but every instinct was screaming at me to get back in my car and drive away as fast as I could. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that I was just being paranoid. It was late, I was tired, and my imagination was running while the bell above the door jangled discordantly. As I entered, the conversation inside immediately stopped, and 3 pairs of eyes turned to me. The tension in the air was palpable. Evening, I said, trying to keep my voice casual. Just need to pay for the gas on pump 1. The man behind the counter nodded slowly, his rheumy eyes never leaving my face as he rang me up. As I handed over my cash, I noticed his hands were stained with something dark grease. I told myself must be from working on cars, but a little voice in the back of my head whispered that it looked an awful lot like dried blood. Long drive ahead of you, one of the other men asked. He was tall and muscular, with a scar running down his cheek. Not just heading home, I replied, eager to get out of there. About an hour down the road, he nodded, exchanging a look with his companions that sent a chill down my spine. Drive safe now, lot of crazy folks out on these roads at night. I mumbled a thanks and practically ran back to my car. As I pulled out of the station, I saw the men watching me from the window. I shuddered and pressed down on the accelerator, wanting to put as much distance between me and that creepy place as possible. About 5 minutes down the road, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it, but as the minutes ticked by, I realized the car behind me was keeping pace, never falling back or trying to pass. My palms started to sweat as I gripped the steering wheel tighter. It's nothing, I told myself, probably just someone going the same way. But the little voice in my head, the one that had noticed the stains on the attendant's hands, wasn't buying it. I decided to test my theory. I slowed down a bit, and sure enough, the car behind me slowed too. I sped up, and it matched my speed perfectly. My heart started to race. This wasn't a coincidence. I tried to get a better look at the car in my mirrors, but all I could make out was that it was a large, dark-colored vehicle, possibly the pickup I had seen at the gas station. The thought made my blood run cold. For the next 10 minutes, I tried every trick I could think of to lose my tail. I varied my speed. I took random turns onto side roads. I even considered pulling over and confronting them. But every time I thought I'd lost them, those headlights would appear in my mirror again. I was starting to panic. My hands were shaking, and I needed help. But out here there was no one to call. My cell phone showed no signal, and I hadn't seen another car on the road for miles. Suddenly the car behind me sped up, pulling alongside me. I risked a glance over and saw the pickup. From the gas station, the driver's face was hidden in shadow, but I could make out the silhouette of the scarred man in the passenger seat. The pickup started to edge closer, trying to run me off the road. I swerved, narrowly avoiding a collision. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. What did these people want? Why were they after me? In desperation, I floored my old car, protested, the engine whining as I pushed it to its limits. The speedometer crept past 80, then 90. The world outside became a blur. The yellow line on the road a continuous streak. The pickup fell behind for a moment, but then I heard the roar of its engine as it gained on me again. These guys weren't going to give up easily. Up ahead, I saw it turn off. Without thinking, I yanked the wheel hard, sending my car skidding onto the unpaved road. The pickup overshot the turn, buying me a few precious seconds. The dirt road was rough, and my car bounced and shuddered as I raced down it. Branches whipped at my windshield, and more than once I thought I was going to lose control, but fear kept my foot pressed firmly on the gas pedal. I could hear the pickup behind me getting closer. By the second, panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced myself to focus. There had to be a way out of this. Just when I thought all hope was lost, I saw lights in the distance. As I got closer, I realized it was a small town, houses, street lights, maybe even people who could help me. I'd never been so happy to see civilization in my life. I burst out onto the main street, tires squealing. The few people still out at this hour stopped and stared as I careened past. In my rearview mirror, I saw the pickup emerge from the dirt road, but instead of following me into town, it slowed them, turned around, and disappeared back the way it came. I didn't stop driving until I reached the local police station. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely put the car in park. I stumbled inside, probably looking like a madman, and blurted out my story to the bewildered officer at the desk. To their credit, the police took me seriously. They took my statement and sent out patrols to look for the pickup and to check out the gas station, but they never found anything. The gas station was abandoned when they got there, looking like it hadn't been used in years. I spent the next few weeks jumping at every shadow, convinced that the men from the gas station were going to come after me again. I changed my route home from work, bought a new car, even considered moving, but as time passed and nothing happened, I slowly started to relax. To this day, I don't know what those men wanted, or why they chased me. Was it just a twisted game to them? Were they going to rob me? Or worse? I'll never know for sure, But one thing certain, I never drive on lonely highways at night anymore. And I always make sure I have a full tank of gas before I leave home. Sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I can still hear the roar of that pickup's engine behind me. It's a reminder that danger can come from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the difference between safety and terror is just a wrong turn on a dark-lived, lonely road. The experience changed me. I'm more cautious now, more aware of my surroundings. But I refuse to let fear control my life. Instead, I've channeled that energy into my photography, capturing the beauty of the world around me, even in its most desolate corners, because I've learned that life is precious, and every moment, even the terrifying ones, is part of what makes us who we are. And sometimes late at night, when I'm editing photos, I'll come across a shot of a lonely gas station or a deserted highway. For a moment, I'm back there, heart racing, palms sweating, but then I take a deep breath, remind myself that I'm safe, and keep working, because in the end, that's all we can do. Keep moving forward no matter what terrors we faced. In the rear-view mirror, the beam of my lighthouse cut through the darkness, a lonely sentinel against the raging storm. I've always found solace in the solitude of my job, but on that fateful night, as I peered through rain-lashed windows at a floundering ship, I had no idea that my act of mercy would invite a terror beyond anything I'd ever imagined. My name is Jack, and I've been the keeper of the Black Rock Lighthouse for nearly 2 decades. It's a solitary life, but one I've come to cherish. The rhythmic sweep of the light, the crash of waves against the rocks, the cry of seagulls, these have been my constant companions until that night. It was early November, and a vicious nor'easter had been battering the coast for days. The sea was a churning mass of gray waves as tall as buildings, smashing against the lighthouse with enough force to make the whole structure shudder. I'd seen my fair share of storms, but this one had a particular fury to it. I was making my usual rounds, checking the equipment and keeping a watchful eye on the horizon, when I saw it, a ship tossed about like a toy in a bathtub, its running lights flickering weakly in the gloom. My heart sank. In these conditions, they didn't stand a chance. Without hesitation, I activated the fog horn and increased the intensity of the light, hoping to guide them to safer waters. But the ship was being pushed inexorably towards the jagged rocks that surrounded the lighthouse island. Then through my binoculars, I saw a figure in the water. Someone had either jumped or been thrown overboard. Acting on instinct, I raced down the spiral staircase and out into the howling wind and stinging rain. The cold hit me like a physical blow as I made my way to the small dock on the leeward side of the island. The figure was being swept towards me by the current, and as they got closer, I could see it was a man struggling weakly against the waves. I threw him a life preserver, and with considerable effort managed to haul him onto the dock. He was a sorry sight, pale, shivering, his clothes torn and hanging off his gaunt frame. But he was alive. "Thank you," he gasped between chattering teeth. Thought I was done, for I helped him to his feet. "Let's get you inside," and warmed up. As we made our way back to the lighthouse, I glanced out to see the ship was gone, swallowed by the storm. A pang of guilt hit me. I should have been able to do more, but I pushed the feeling aside. Right now, I had a survivor to take care of. Once inside, I got the man settled in front of the pot-belly stove in my living quarters, wrapped in blankets, with a mug of hot tea in his trembling hands. As color slowly returned to his cheeks, I took a moment to really look at him. He was younger than I'd initially thought, probably in his early 30s. His face was gaunt, with deep-set eyes that darted nervously around the room. There was something off about him, but I chalked it up to his ordeal. "I'm Jack," I said, trying to put him at ease. "What's your name?" He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Tom. My name's Tom." "Well, Tom, you're safe now. Once the storm passes, I'll RA for help, and we'll Get you back to the mainland. A look I couldn't quite decipher flashed across his face. No, he said a bit too forcefully, then more calmly. I mean, there's no rush. I don't want to be a bother. I frowned. It was an odd reaction. But again, I reminded myself of what he'd just been through. It's no bother. But we're stuck here until the storm passes anyway. Why? Don't you get some rest? I showed him to the small guest room we kept for the rare maintenance worker or inspector. As I turned to leave, he grabbed my arm. His grip was surprisingly strong. Thank you, he said again, his eyes boring into mine. I won't forget this. Sleep didn't come easy. That night the storm continued to rage, and I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. There was something about Tom that didn't add up. The ship he'd supposedly come from, I hadn't seen anyone else in the water nor any debris, and his reluctance to be returned to the mainland. I must have dozed off eventually, because I woke with a start to the sound of movement in the lighthouse. Glancing at my watch, I saw it was just past 3 a.m. The storm had finally begun to subside. The wind now a low moan rather than a howling shriek. Curious, I got up to investigate. As I approached the kitchen, I heard muttering. Tom was awake, pacing back and forth, talking to himself in low, urgent tones. Can't let them find me, have to stay hidden. He doesn't suspect. I froze, my blood running cold. Who was he hiding from? What didn't I suspect? Just then a floorboard creaked under my foot. The muttering stopped abruptly. Jack, Tom called out, his voice suddenly cheerful. That you? I was just getting a glass of water. I stepped into the kitchen, trying to keep my face neutral. Everything okay, Tom? I heard voices. He laughed, but it sounded forced. Just talking to myself. Bad habit. I'm afraid this place is a bit creepy at night, isn't it? I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We stood there in awkward silence for a moment before I excused myself and went back to bed. But sleep was impossible now. My mind was racing, trying to piece together the puzzle of my mysterious guest. The next morning I rose early, determined to get to the bottom of things. I needed to contact the mainland, find out if there were any reports of shipwrecks or missing persons. But as I climbed the stairs to the radio room, I heard something that made my blood run cold. The sound of smashing equipment. I burst into the room to find Tom, a hammer in his hand, methodic, destroying the radio. He whirled to face me, his eyes wild. I can't let you call them, he snarled. I won't go back. I raised my hands, trying to calm him. Tom, take it easy. Whatever's going on, we can figure it out. But there was no reasoning with him. He lunged at me, swinging the hammer. I managed to dodge, but lost my footing on the stairs. The world spun as I tumbled down, pain exploding in my head as it struck the metal steps. I came to sometime later, groggy and in pain. I was in the storage closet, my hands and feet bound with rope. Tom was there, pacing back and forth, muttering to himself again. What's going on, Tom? I asked, my voice hoarse. He stopped pacing and looked at me, his eyes fever bright. I'm sorry, Jack, I truly am. You seem like a good man, but I can't go back. I won't. Over the next hour the story came out in bits and pieces. Tom was an escaped convict. He'd been on a prison transport ship. When the storm hit, in the chaos, he'd managed to slip his cuffs and jump overboard, taking his chances with the sea rather than face a life behind bars. They'll be looking for me, he said, his voice trembling, but they won't think to check here for a while. I just need to lay low, figure out my next move. I tried to reason with him to convince him that this course of action would only make things worse, but he was beyond reason, driven by desperation and fear. Days passed. Tom kept me tied up, only loosening my bonds for brief periods to eat or use the bathroom. He was paranoid, jumping at every sound, convinced that at any moment the authorities would come bursting in. I bided my time, looking for an opportunity to escape or overpower him. But Tom was vigilant, never letting his guard down. And as the days turned to weeks, I began to lose hope. But then one stormy night, much like the one that had brought Tom to my door, everything changed. We heard the unmistakable sound of a helicopter approaching. Tom panicked, racing to the top of the lighthouse to douse the light. In that moment of distraction, I managed to work my bonds loose. My muscles screamed in protest as I forced myself to my feet and stumbled after him. I found him at the top of the lighthouse, frantically trying to disable the light. Without thinking, I charged at him. We grappled, teetering dangerously close to the edge of the platform. In a final desperate move, I managed to shove him away from the light. Tom lost his balance, his eyes widening in shock as he toppled over the railing. His scream was lost in the howling wind as he plummeted to the rocks below. The helicopter landed a short while later. It was the monthly supply run delayed by the recent storms. The crew was shocked to find me in my battered state, and even more shocked when I led them to Tom's broken body on the rocks in the aftermath. As I gave my statement to the authorities and tried to come to terms with what had happened, I couldn't help but reflect on the cruel irony of it all. Tom had come to my lighthouse seeking refuge, and in doing so had turned it into a prison for both of us. The lighthouse has been automated now. They said it was time. The technology had made my job obsolete, but I know the real reason. After what happened with Tom, they didn't think anyone would want to stay here. But I'm still here, living in a small cottage on the mainland, watching the beam of the lighthouse sweep across the water each night. Because despite everything, this place is still my home, and I've learned that sometimes the real monsters aren't the ones we rescue from the sea, but the ones we create through our own fear and desperation. The light still shines, a beacon of hope in the darkness. And I'm still here, keeping watch, ready to face whatever the sea might bring to my shore. The setting sun painted the abandoned town in hues of orange and red, casting long shadows that seemed to reach out like grasping fingers. As I adjusted my camera to capture the eerie beauty, I had no idea that I was about to stumble into a nightmare that would challenge everything I thought I knew about reality and my own sanity. My name is Mia, and I'm what you'd call an urban explorer, an adventure blogger. I've made a career out of seeking out forgotten places and sharing their stories with my followers. Ghost towns are my specialty. There's something hauntingly beautiful about these remnants of human ambition left to decay. This particular town, nestled in a remote valley of the American Southwest, coal had been on my bucket list for years. Silverton, they called it, a once booming mining community that had dried up almost overnight. In the 1950s, the official story was that the silver had run out, but local legends hinted at darker reasons for its abandonment. I arrived just before sunset, wanting to get some atmospheric shots for my blog. The town was a photographer's dream: weathered wooden buildings, rusted mining equipment, and tumbleweeds rolling down them dusty Main Street. It was like stepping back in time as I wandered the empty streets, snapping photos and making notes for my article. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The silence was too complete, the stillness too absolute. Even in abandoned places, you usually hear something: wind whistling through broken windows, the scurry of small animals. But here it was as if the town was holding its breath. I brushed off the unease, chalking it up to an overactive imagination fueled by too many ghost stories. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains, I decided to call it a day and head back to my campsite just outside town. That's when I saw it, a liquor of movement in my peripheral vision. I whirled around, camera at the ready, but the street behind me was empty, just a trick of the fading light, I told myself. But then I saw it again, this time in an upstairs window of what had once been the town hotel. My heart started to race. I approached the hotel, its weathered sign creaking in a wind I couldn't feel. The door was ajar, swinging gently on rusted hinges. I hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside. The floorboards groaning under my weight. The interior was a mess of peeling wallpaper, and broken furniture dust motes dancing in the beam of my flashlight. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. "Is anyone here?" Silence answered me, but as my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I noticed something strange. The layer of dust covering everything was undisturbed except for a set of footprints leading up the stairs, fresh footprints, my heart pounding. I followed the trail, each step taking me further from the safety of the outside world. The second floor was a long hallway lined with doors, most hanging off their hinges, but one door at the far end of the hall was closed. As I approached, I heard something that made my blood run cold, voices muffled but unmistakable coming from behind that door. I stood there frozen in indecision. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out of this town, and never look back, but the journalist in me, the part that had built my career on uncovering hidden stories, urged me forward. With a trembling hand, I reached for the door knob. It turned easily, the door swinging open without a sound. What I saw inside defied all logic and reason. The room was fully furnished, not with the decayed remnants I'd seen downstairs, but with pristine 1950s decor, and seated around a table were 5 people dressed in period clothing, engaged in animated conversation. They turned to look at me, their faces a mixture of surprise and something else, something hungry. Well, one of them said, a man with a pencil-thin mustache and a gleaming smile. "Looks like we have a visitor, folks." I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. This couldn't be real. I must have hit my head, or maybe I was having some kind of hallucination. But as I backed away, they stood up and started to follow me, their movements jerky and unnatural, like marionette controlled by an unseen hand. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear them behind me, their footsteps echoing in the hallway. As I reached the stairs, I risked a glance back. What I saw nearly stopped my heart. They were changing as they moved, their flesh seeming to melt and reform. Gone were the friendly smiles, and period clothing. In their place were twisted inhuman forms with elongated limbs and 2 wide mouths filled with needle-like teeth. I flew down the stairs, nearly falling. In my haste, I burst out of the hotel and into the street, gasping for air. But the nightmare wasn't over. All around me, the town was coming to life. Figures emerged from doorways and alleys, all of them undergoing the same horrific transformation I'd witnessed in the hotel. The entire population of Silverton, or whatever these things were, converging on me. I ran blindly, my only thought to get back to my car and escape this madness. But in my panic, I took a wrong turn. I found myself in a dead end, the rusted remains of mining equipment looming over me like silent sentinels. As I turned to face my pursuers, a voice rang out. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, filling the air with its otherworldly resonance. Well, Seeker," it said, "we've been waiting for you." The creatures stopped their advance, forming a semicircle around me, the one in the center, which I recognized as the man from the hotel, stepped forward. Its face was a writhing mass of shadows, but its voice was eerily calm. "For too long we've been trapped here, bound to this place by forces beyond your comprehension. But you, with your curious mind and your camera that captures souls, you can set us free." I pressed myself against the wall, trying to put as much distance between myself and these things as possible. "What are you?" I managed to croak out. The creature's mouth split into a grotesque parody of a smile. "We are the forgotten, the abandoned, the lost. We are what happens when a place is left to rot, when memories fade and time stands still. And now you will join us." It reached out with a twisted hand, its fingers elongating like smoke. I closed my eyes, bracing for the end. But instead of cold terror, I felt a sudden warmth on my face. I opened my eyes to find myself lying on the ground outside the town, the morning sun peeking over the mountains. My camera lay beside me, the screen cracked, but still functioning. With shaking hands, I scrolled through the photos I'd taken the night before. Empty streets, dilapidated buildings, nothing unusual, until I reached the last image. It showed the hotel room exactly as I'd seen it, fully furnished, occupied by smiling people in 1950s clothing, but their eyes were solid black, staring directly at the camera with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I scrambled to my feet and ran to my car, not stopping until I was miles away from Silverton. I'd never gone back, and I'd never shared that last photo or the full story of what happened that night. Until now, I still explore abandoned places, still share their stories. But now I'm more cautious, more aware that sometimes the ghosts we search for are all too real and all too eager to add new souls to their ranks. And sometimes late at night, when I'm editing photos from my latest expedition, I swear I can hear distant voices calling my name, inviting me back to that town where time stands still, and the forgotten things lurk in the shadows, waiting for unwary travelers to set them free. The crack of a twig underfoot shattered the forest's silence, freezing us in our tracks. We'd been hiking for hours, reveling in the solitude of nature, but that single sound changed everything. As we huddled together, straining our ears in the growing darkness, we had no idea that our peaceful camping trip was about to turn into a desperate fight for survival against an enemy more dangerous than any wild animal. My name's Chris, and I've been an avid camper for most of my life. This particular trip was with my two best friends, Sarah and Mike. We've been planning it for months, eager to explore a remote part of the Appalachian wilderness that was off the beaten path. The promise of unspoiled nature and true solitude had drawn us in. If only we'd known what was really waiting for us in those woods. We'd set up camp in a small clearing near a bubbling stream, the kind of idyllic spot you see on postcards. The first 2 days were perfect: hiking, fishing, sitting around the campfire, sharing stories, and laughing. It felt like we'd found our own private paradise. On the third day, we decided to explore deeper into the forest. The trees grew denser, the undergrowth thicker. It was exhilarating, feeling like we were the first people to set foot in this part of the woods in years. That's when we heard voices in the distance. At first, we were annoyed so much for having the wilderness to ourselves, but as we got closer, we realized these weren't the sounds of other hikers enjoying nature. The voices were angry, aggressive. We crouched behind a fallen log, peering through the foliage. What we saw made my blood run cold. In a small clearing stood a group of men, heavily armed and dressed in ragged camouflage. They were arguing over a map spread out on a makeshift table. I'm telling you, the cache is here, one of them growled, jabbing his finger at the map. We need to move it before the feds catch up to us. Sarah gripped my arm, her eyes wide with fear. We'd stumbled upon something dangerous, very dangerous. Slowly, carefully, we began to back away, but fate wasn't on our side. Mike's foot caught on a route, sending him stumbling backward. The crack of breaking branches might as well have been a gunshot. The men's heads snapped up, their eyes scanning the forest. Who's there? One of them shouted. Show yourselves. We ran. There was no time for stealth or clever plans. Pure adrenaline fueled us as we crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at our faces. Behind us, we could hear shouts and the sound of pursuit. We need to split up, Mike gasped. As we ran, it'll be harder for them to track us. I wanted to argue to keep us together, but I knew he was right. With a quick nod to each other, we veered off in different directions. I had headed downhill, hoping to find the stream. We camped near water would help cover my tracks. The forest was a blur around me. As I ran, my heart pounding in my ears, I could hear someone behind me closing, and panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced it down. I couldn't afford to lose focus now. I burst out of the trees onto the bank of the stream, nearly losing my footing on the slippery rocks. Without hesitation, I plunged into the cold water, gasping at the shock. I waded downstream, trying to move as quickly and quietly as possible. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. I dragged myself out of the water and into a small cavern formed by overhanging rocks. I pressed myself as far back as I could, trying to control my ragged breathing. The sound of splashing water made me freeze. Someone was in the stream searching. I held my breath as a figure passed by my hiding spot, so close I could have reached out and touched them. It was one of the men from the clearing, a rifle clutched at his hands. For a heart-stopping moment, he paused near my cave. I was sure he'd heard me, that at any second he'd peer in and find me. But then he moved on, continuing downstream. I stayed in that cramped, damp space until my muscles screamed in protest, and the light filtering through the trees began to fade. Only then did I dare to emerge. The forest had gone quiet, the normal sounds of birds and small animals conspicuously absent. I knew I needed to find Sarah and Mike, but I had no idea where they'd gone, or if they'd even managed to escape. As night fell, the woods became a different world. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every sound a potential enemy. I moved as quietly as I could, constantly scanning my surroundings. I was beginning to lose hope of finding my friends when I heard it, a soft whistle, barely audible. It was a tune we'd agreed on years ago, a way to signal each other if we ever got separated. While hiking, my heart leapt. It had to be Sarah or Mike. I followed the sound, moving cautiously. It led me to a dense thicket, and as I approached, I saw a hand reach out, beckoning me, and it was Sarah. She looked terrible, scratched, dirty, and utterly exhausted, but she was alive. We embraced silently, both of us too overwhelmed for words. "Have you seen Mike?" I whispered when we finally broke apart. She shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "I thought he'd be with you. We spent a sleepless night in that thicket, taking turns keeping watch. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves had us on edge, sure that we'd been discovered. As dawn broke, we knew we had to move. We needed to find Mike and get out of these woods. But we also knew that those men were still out there hunting us." We moved carefully, trying to stay hidden while searching for any sign of Mike. The forest felt different now, no longer a place of beauty and adventure, but a dangerous maze where death lurked behind every tree. It was mid-morning when we heard the gunshot, a single crack that echoed through the trees, sending birds scattering into the sky. Sarah and I looked at each other, the same terrible thought in both our minds. "Mike." We moved towards the sound, caution wearing with our desperate need to find our friend. As we crested a small hill, we saw them, the group of men gathered in a small clearing, and there on his knees in the center was Mike. My heart sank. Mike's face was bruised and bloody, his hands tied behind his back. The leader of the group stood over him, a pistol in his hand. "I'm going to ask you one more time," the man growled. "Where are your friends?" Mike spat blood onto the ground. "Go to hell." The man raised his gun, and I knew we were out of time. Without thinking, I grabbed a rock and hurled it as hard as I could into the trees on the opposite side of the clearing. The distraction worked. As the men turned towards the noise, Sarah and I burst from our hiding place. I tackled the leader, sending his gun flying, while Sarah ran to Mike. What followed was chaos. I fought with a desperation I didn't know I possessed, driven by the need to protect my friend. Sarah managed to cut Mike free, and he joined the fray. Despite his injuries, somehow, in the confusion, we managed to break free. We ran like we'd never run before. Our feet barely touching the ground behind us, we could hear angry shouts and the occasional gunshot, but we didn't stop. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs felt like jelly. When we finally stopped, gasping for breath, we found ourselves on the edge of a road. The sight of that weathered asphalt, a sign of civilization, nearly brought me to my tears. We flagged down the first car we saw, probably looking like wild people, with our torn clothes and dirty, our scratched faces. The elderly couple inside was understandably hesitant, but something in our desperate pleas convinced them to help. They drove us to the nearest town, where we immediately went to the police. We told him everything about the armed men, their hidden catch of the chase through the woods. They took our statement seriously, calling in state police and even the FBI in the days that followed. As we recovered in a local hospital, we learned the full story. The men were part of a domestic terrorist group that had been operating in the area for months. Our accidental discovery had led to their capture and the dismantling of their entire network. We were hailed as heroes, but it didn't feel heroic. We were just three friends who'd gone looking for adventure and found more than we bargained for. That camping trip changed us in ways I'm still trying to understand. We'd faced death together, seen the darkness that can lurk in the hearts of men, but we'd also discovered a strength in ourselves and in our friendship that we never knew existed. I still go camping, still find peace in the wilderness, but now I'm always aware that even in the most beautiful places, danger can be lurking just out of sight. And I never go into the woods without remembering the lesson we learned on that terrifying day, that sometimes the most dangerous predators in the forest are the ones that walk on two legs. The hum of the fluorescent lights was the only sound in the empty laundromat, a stark contrast to the busy hum of the machines during the day. I'd always found comfort in the quiet of the night shift, but as I folded the last load of towels, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck told me that tonight I wasn't alone. Little did I know this ordinary night was about to become a terrifying ordeal that would change my life forever. My name's Rachel, and I've been working the night shift at the 24-hour suds duds for about 6 months now. It's not the most glamorous job, but it pays the bills. While I finish my degree, most nights are uneventful, just me, the rhythmic tumble of the washers and dryers, and the occasional insomniac customer. That night started like any other. I clocked in at 11 p.m., nodded a goodbye to the evening shift worker, and settled in for my usual routine. Check the machine means restock the detergent vending machine, maybe catch up on some reading during the quiet hours. It was around 1 a.m. when I first noticed him, a man standing across the street, just watching. At first, I didn't think much of it. This wasn't exactly a bustling neighborhood, but it wasn't unusual to see people out late. Still, something about the way he stood so still and focused made me uneasy. I tried to shake off the feeling, focusing on my tasks, but every time I glanced up, he was still there, not moving, not smoking, not doing anything but staring directly at the laundromat at me. By 2 a.m., my unease had grown into full-blown anxiety. I closed the blinds, but I could still feel his presence out there. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? There's a man standing on a public street. I didn't want to sound paranoid at 3 a.m. I heard it, a soft tapping on the glass of the front door. My heart leapt into my throat. I turned slowly, praying it was just my imagination. But there he was, his face pressed against the glass, eyes wide and unblinking were closed. I called out, trying to keep my voice steady, "Come back in the morning." He didn't respond, didn't move, just kept staring. Caring, I reached for my phone with trembling hands, ready to call for help. That's when he spoke, his voice muffled through the glass, but still chilling. "Let me in, Rachel. I just want to talk." Ice flooded my veins. How did he know my name? "I'm calling the police," I said, my finger hovering over the dial button. His expression didn't change, but his next words froze me in place. Now, Rachel, you don't want to do that. Not if you care about what happens to your mother in that nursing home across town." My breath caught in my throat. How could he possibly know about my mom? "What do you want?" I asked, hating the tremor in my voice. "I told you. I just want to talk." "Open the door, Rachel." Every instinct screamed at me not to do it, but the threat to my mother overrode my fear. With shaking hands, I unlocked the door. He slipped inside like a shadow, his movements fluid and eerily graceful. Up close, he was older than I'd thought, maybe in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and eyes that seemed to bore right through me. There that wasn't so hard was that he said his voice smooth and controlled now. "Why don't we sit down and have a chat?" I backed away as he advanced, my hip bumping against the folding table. "Who are you? What do you want?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Who I am isn't important. What I want, well, that's a bit more complicated." For the next hour, he talked about my life, my family, my hopes, and dreams. He knew things no stranger should know, where I'd gone to high school, my first boyfriend's name, the time I broke my arm falling out of a tree when I was 9. With each revelation, my terror grew. This wasn't just some random creep. This man had been watching me, studying me, for who knows how long. Why I finally managed to ask why me. His eyes gleamed in the harsh fluorescent light. "Because you're special, Rachel. You have something I need." Before I could ask what he meant, he was moving faster than I thought possible. He closed the distance between us, his hand shooting out to grasp my arm. I felt a sharp prick, and the world began to swim around me. "Don't fight it," I heard him say, his voice seeming to come from far away. "It'll all be over soon." I woke up in darkness, my head pounding. As my eyes adjusted, I realized I was in some kind of basement. The air was damp and musty, and I could hear water dripping somewhere nearby. Panic set in as I tried to move and found my hands and feet bound. I was lying on a cold concrete floor, the rough surface scraping against my cheek as I struggled. "Ah, you're awake." His voice came from the shadows, making me flinch. "Good, we can begin." What? I croaked, my throat dry and scratchy. "What do you want from me?" He stepped into view, holding something that gleamed dully in the low light. "A knife." "I told you, Rachel, you have something I need, something very special." As he approached, I saw that his eyes had changed. They were no longer just cold and calculating wine, but seemed to glow with an inner light. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a nightmare. But the pain as he pressed the knife against my arm was all too real. "Your blood, Rachel. It's unique, special, and it's going to help me become something more." I screamed as he cut, the sound echoing off the bare walls. But even as I cried out, a part of my mind was racing, looking for a way out. I hadn't survived years of late-night shifts in sketchy neighborhoods to die in some madman's basement. As he leaned and distracted by the blood welling up from the cut, I saw my chance. I brought my head up as hard as I could, smashing it into his face. He reeled back, cursing, the knife clattering to the floor. Ignoring the pain in my arm, I rolled, managing to get my bound hands on the knife. It was awkward, but I managed to saw through the ropes on my wrists. By the time he recovered, I was free and armed. "You don't understand," he snarled, blood streaming from his nose. "You can't stop this. It's already begun." I didn't wait to hear more. I lashed out with the knife, catching him across the chest. He howled more in rage than pain and lunged at me. We grappled, rolling across the cold floor. He was stronger, but I was fighting for my life. Somehow, in the struggle, the knife ended up buried in his shoulder. He staggered back, looking more surprised than hurt. And that's when I saw it, his blood. It wasn't red, but a dark, oily black that seemed to move with a life of its own. Taking advantage of his shock, I bolted for the stairs I'd spotted earlier. I took them two at a time, my heart pounding in my ears. Behind me, I could hear him recovering, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. I burst out into what looked like an abandoned house, moonlight streaming through broken windows. Without pausing, I ran for the front door, praying it wasn't locked. The cool night air hit me like a slap as I tumbled out onto an overgrown lawn. I didn't know where I was, but I could see lights in the distance. Civilization, safety. I ran like I'd never run before, ignoring the pain in my bare feet as they slapped against the pavement. I didn't look back, didn't slow down until I reached a lit gas station. The attendant eyes went wide as I burst in bloody and wild. I'd call the police, I gasped. Please. What followed was a blur of police statements, hospital visit, and questions I couldn't fully answer. They found the house, but there was no sign of the man, just a basement full of strange equipment and jars of dark liquid. I tried not to think about, they told me, I was lucky to be alive that I'd escaped from a serial killer who'd been targeting young women in the area, but they didn't see what I saw. They didn't know about the black blood there. Glowing eyes. I quit my job at the laundromat, moved to a new city, but I can't shake the feeling that it's not over, that someday he'll find me again, because whatever he was trying to become, I'm sure it's still out there waiting, watching, so I stay vigilant. I've taken self-defense classes, installed a top-of-the-line security system in my new apartment, but most importantly, I've learned to trust my instincts, because sometimes that prickling on the back of your neck isn't just paranoia. Sometimes it's your conscience warning you that the monster in the shadows is all too real. And next time, I'll be ready. The battered vacancy sign flickered in the rearview mirror as I pulled onto the empty highway. My new passenger, a lanky guy with a scraggly beard, shifted nervously in his seat. I'd picked up plenty of hitchhikers before, but something about this one set my teeth on edge. Little did I know my act of kindness as about to plunge me into a nightmarish journey that would test the limits of my survival instincts. My name's Jake, and I've been driving cross country for the better part of a decade. There's something about the open road that calls to me, the endless stretch of asphalt, the ever-changing landscape, the promise of adventure around every bend. I've seen my fair share of strange things in my travels, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night. It was just past midnight, and I'd been driving for hours. The monotony of the desert highway was starting to get to me, my eyelids growing heavy despite the thermos of coffee at my side. That's when I saw him, a lone figure on the side of the road, thumb outstretched. I hesitated for a moment. It was late, and we were miles from anywhere, but the guy looked harmless enough, and I'd been in his shoes before. I knew how much a simple ride could mean. I pulled over, rolling down the passenger window. "Where you headed?" "Just down the roadways," he said, his voice growly. "From Disuse, name's Mike." I introduced myself and unlocked the door. As Mike slid into the seat, I caught a whiff of stale sweat and something else I couldn't quite place. I chalked it up to days on the road and pulled back onto the highway. We drove in silence for a while, the only sound the hum of tires on asphalt and the low murmur of the radio. I tried to make small talk, asking where he was from and where he was going, but Mike's answers were vague and evasive. He seemed more interested in me asking pointed questions about my route and when I'd last stopped for gas. As the miles ticked by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Mike's hands were shaking slightly, and his eyes darted constantly to the rearview mirror, as if expecting to see someone following us. "You okay, man?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "You seem a bit on edge." Mike's whole body tensed. "I'm fine," he snapped. Just keep driving." The atmosphere in the car grew thick with tension. I began to regret my decision to pick him up, but we were in the middle of nowhere. I couldn't exactly kick him out here. That when I saw the flashing lights in my rearview mirror, a police car was pulling us over. Relief washed over me. Whatever was going on with Mike, surely the presence of law enforcement would straighten things out. But as I started to slow down, Mike's hand shot out, gripping my arm with surprising strength. "Don't stop," he hissed, his eyes wild with panic. "If you stop, we're both dead." My heart began to race. "What are you talking about?" "That the police Mike's laugh was harsh and humorless. "That ain't no cop. Trust me now. Drive against my better judgment." I pressed down on the accelerator. The police car sped up to its siren wailing to life. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Mike reached into his jacket and pulled out a gun. My blood ran cold at the sight of it. "I'll explain later," he said. "Right now, you need to lose them." My mind was reeling. How had a simple act of kindness turned into this nightmare? But with a gun pointed at me and a mysterious pursuer on our tail, I didn't have much choice. I pressed the pedal to the floor, the engine roaring as we shot forward. What followed was the most terrifying drive of my life. We tore down the empty highway at breakneck speeds, the police car right on our tail. Mike kept urging me to go faster, to take sudden turns onto side roads. I lost track of time, focused entirely on keeping us on the road and away from our pursuer. Finally, after what felt like hours, we lost them. I pulled over on a deserted stretch of road, my hand shaking so badly I could barely turn off the engine. "All right," I said, turning to Mike. "I think I deserve some answers now." Mike was quiet for a long moment, the gun still clutched in his trembling hand. Then slowly, he began to talk. He told me a story so outlandish, I would have thought he was crazy if I hadn't just lived through a high-speed chase with a fake police car. Mike claimed he was a former government agent who'd uncovered a massive conspiracy. The people chasing us, he said, were part of a shadow organization that had infiltrated every level of government. "They're everywhere," he said, his eyes darting nervously around. "Police, FBI, you can't trust any of them. I've got evidence that could bring the whole thing crashing down. But they'll kill me before they let that happen." I sat there trying to process what I was hearing. Part of me wanted to believe it was all some elaborate delusion, but the chase we'd just been through was all too real. "So what now?" I asked, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. Mike checked his watch, his brow furrowed. "We need to keep moving. I've got a contact a few hours from here. If we can make it to them, we'll be safe." I weighed my options. I could try to make a run for it, but with the gun and the very real threat of these mysterious pursuers, that seemed like a bad idea. And if what Mike was saying was true, well, I was already in deep. Might as well see it through. We drove through the night, sticking to back roads and keeping a constant watch for any signs of pursuit. Mike's paranoia was infectious, and soon I found myself jumping at every set of headlights, every unexpected sound. As dawn began to break, we pulled into a small, nondescript town. Mike directed me to a rundown motel on the outskirts. "Wait here," he said, getting out of the car. "I need to make contact." I watched as he disappeared into one of the rooms. Minutes ticked by, stretching into an hour or more. Something didn't feel right. Making a split-second decision, I got out of the car and crept towards the room. As I neared the door, I heard voices, Mike's and another I didn't recognize. They were arguing. "You brought an outsider into this," the unknown voice hissed. "Are you insane?" "I didn't have a choice," Mike replied, "but don't worry, I'll take care of it." My blood ran cold. I'd been a fool to trust him. I turned to run, but a hand clamped down on my shoulder. I found myself staring down the barrel of Mike's gun. "I'm sorry," he said, and he genuinely looked it. But too much time seemed to slow down. Oh, in that moment, I saw my life flash before my eyes. All the roads I'd traveled, the people I'd met, the experiences I'd had. I wasn't ready for it to end with a desperation I didn't know I possessed. I lashed out, my fist connected with Mike's jaw, sending him stumbling backward. The gun went off, the bullet whizzing past my ear. I didn't wait to see if he'd recover. I ran like I'd never run before, my lungs burning and my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear shouts behind me, footsteps giving chase. But I had one advantage. I knew these streets, these forgotten back roads of America better than anyone. I zigzagged through alleys, vaulted fences, and ducked through abandoned buildings. Eventually the sounds of pursuit faded, but I didn't stop running until I reached the highway. By some miracle, a truck was approaching. I flagged it down, probably looking like a madman with my wild eyes and heaving breaths. The driver, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, took one look at me and opened the door. "Honey, are you in trouble?" she asked as I climbed, and I nodded, too out of breath to speak. She didn't ask any more questions, just put the truck in gear and sped off. As we drove away from that town, leaving Mike and his conspiracies behind, I felt a mix of relief and lingering fear. I knew I'd be looking over my shoulder for a long time to come, wondering if they were still out there, still looking for me. But as the miles rolled by and the adrenaline faded, I found myself reflecting on the experience. It had been terrifying, yes, but it had also shown me something about myself. I was stronger than I thought, more resourceful, more determined to survive. The open road had always called to me, promising adventure and new experiences. Well, I'd certainly gotten that in spades. And while I wasn't sure I'd ever pick up another hitchhiker, I knew I wouldn't let this experience keep me from the life I loved, because out there beyond the reach of shadowy organizations and desperate men with guns, the road still stretched on, full of possibilities. And I was still here, still driving, still free to chase the horizon. As the sun rose, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever came next, whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them. After all, I was a survivor, and the road with all its dangers and wonders was still calling my name. The first rock shattered our kitchen windows, sending glass shards skittering across the floor like ice across a frozen lake. My wife, Emily, screamed, clutching our daughter to her chest. As we huddled in the corner of our once peaceful vacation cabin, the shouts from outside grew louder, more menacing. "Get out, you don't belong here." What had started as a dream family getaway was rapidly descending into a nightmare that would test our will to survive and change us forever. I, Mark, a 35-year-old software engineer from the city, Emily, and I had been planning this trip to the mountains for months, eager to introduce our 5-year-old daughter, Lily, to the joys of nature. We'd found a charming cabin online, nestled in a small community that promised peace, quiet, and breathtaking views. It seemed perfect, a chance to escape the chaos of urban life and bond as a family. The first 2 days were idyllic. We hiked through lush forests, roasted marshmallows under a canopy of stars, and breathed in the crisp mountain air. Lily was enchanted, her eyes wide with wonder at each new discovery. Emily and I felt the stress of our daily lives melting away with each passing hour. But on the third day, things began to change. We noticed sideways glances from locals. When we ventured into the small town for supplies, conversations would stop abruptly. When we entered the general store, an elderly man spat on the ground as we passed him on the street. We tried to shrug it off, attributing it to the weariness that small isolated communities often have towards outsiders. That evening, as we sat on the cabin's porch watching the sunset, a pickup truck roared past. The driver leaned out, hurling a beer bottle that shattered at our feet. "Go back where you came from," he yelled, his words slightly slurred but filled with venom. Shaken, we retreated inside, locking the doors and windows. Emily wanted to leave immediately, but I convinced her it was just one drunk troublemaker we paid for a week, and I was determined not to let one incident ruin our vacation. How naive I was. The next day, the tension in town was palpable. People openly glared at us, muttering under their breaths. At the local diner, our order was accidentally dropped on the floor, the waitress's apology dripping with insincerity. As we left, I overheard a group of men at the counter. "They're not natural," one said, "bringing their city ways here, corrupting our home." I hurried Emily and Lily back to the cabin, my mind racing. What had we done to provoke such hostility? We'd been nothing but polite, respectful of local customs. It didn't make sense. That night, the first rock came through our window, then another, and another. The shouting started soon after, a chorus of angry voices demanding we leave. I called the local sheriff, but the response chilled me to the bone. "Ain't nothing we can do," he drawled, sounding almost amused. "Folks around here don't take kindly to outsiders. Best you pack up and go, for things get ugly." As I hung up, the realization hit me like a physical blow. We were alone. No one was coming to help us. I looked at Emily, her face pale with fear, and Lily confused and frightened, clinging to her mother. In that moment, I knew I had to be strong for them. We had to find a way out. The crowd outside was growing, their shouts becoming more aggressive. I could see flickering torchlight through the curtains. This was rapidly escalating beyond a few local troublemakers. This was a mob driven by a xenophobia I couldn't comprehend. "We need to leave," I whispered to Emily now. She nodded, her eyes wide but determined. We moved quickly, grabbing only what we could carry. I shoved some clothes and our important documents into a backpack, while Emily packed some food and water. Lily, bless her, seemed to understand the gravity of the situation and remained quiet, clutching her favorite stuffed animal. The sound of splintering would told me they were trying to break down the front door. We didn't have much time. I led my family to the back of the cabin to a small window I'd noticed earlier that led out into the dense forest behind the property. As I helped Emily and Lily through the window, a crash from the front of the cabin told me the mob had broken. In the sound of heavy footsteps and angry voices spurred us into action. We ran into the woods. The darkness swallowing us up. The forest was alive with nighttime sounds, but all I could hear was the pounding of my heart and the ragged breathing of my family. As we fled behind us, shouts of anger turned to confusion as the mob discovered the cabin empty. We pushed on through the undergrowth, branches whipping at our faces, roots threatening to trip us at every step. Lily was trying to be brave, but I could hear her quiet sobs. Emily stumbled, and I caught her pulling her close. For a moment, "We're going to be okay, hey?" I whispered, hoping I sounded more confident than I felt after what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes. We heard the sound of vehicles in the distance. The mob had realized we'd fled into the woods and was organizing a search. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced it down. I had to think clearly. I remembered seeing a map of the area in the cabin. There was a river not far from here. If we could reach it, we might be able to throw off any pursuers. I led my family towards where I thought the river should be. Praying my memory and sense of direction weren't failing me. The sound of the search party grew closer, flashlight beams cutting through the trees behind us. Just when I thought we couldn't go on, I heard it, the faint sound of rushing water. The river. We quickened our pace, hope giving us a second wind. We broke through the tree line onto the riverbank. The water was fast moving and looked deep. For a moment I hesitated. Was I leading my family from one danger into another? The crack of a branch behind us made the decision for me. There, a voice shouted. Flashlight beam swung in our direction. We have to cross, like, and subscribe for 4